Hello, comrades. Today we'll be reading The Young Lords, a Radical History by I forgot the author of the name by Johanna Fernandez Fernandez. We will be reading chapter 8 on page 250. That, as always, comrades, we are going to first start with the second Rainbow Coalition Statement of Unity, which is what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to screen share. All right. I hope y'all can see this. And with that, I'll begin reading the Statement of Unity. Preface. The U.S. was founded as a colonial settler state based upon white supremacy and slavery, stealing the lands of the indigenous nations, breaking every treaty made with them, and confining them to quote-unquote reservations, concentration camps. As the country became more powerful, the ego sunk its claws into other nations, making war on Mexico and grabbing its northern territory, invading Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines, and either annexing them outright or making them colonies or neo-colonies. And in the 20th century, it became the major imperialist power in the world, exploiting both the people within its boundaries and those in every other country, bullying them with military intervention, and robbing them of their right to self-determination. As C.P. Newton stated, we have two enemies to fight, racism and capitalism. Between the two, capitalism is primary. Racism is a byproduct of capitalism. The working people of the world, of every ethnicity or nationality, face a common enemy that is destroying life on Earth. Our enemy is a small ruling class of property owners. Is a small ruling class of property owners controlling most of the world's wealth and resources. We must have our basic needs met to live a good and meaningful life: food, shelter, healthcare, education, freedom from the oppression of the state, and peace with other nations. To obtain these essential things for life, we must have the power to see to it that the abundance that is available is shared equitably. Statement of Unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. The legacy of the First Rainbow Coalition dates back to its founding on April 4th, 1969, by the original Black Panther Party, original Young Lords, a Young Patriots organization. A number of other organizations joined this coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Rising Up Angry, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses had developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight back against this capitalist imperialist system in various ways or on particular demands. Nevertheless, none had established a movement quite like the First Rainbow Coalition. This historic movement was the first of its kind that established a model of class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated at the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a quote-unquote race struggle. He said that's a class struggle, god damn it. By uniting with the various oppressed ethnicities and national, by uniting with the sorry, by uniting with the various oppressed ethnicities and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between the various ethnic communities that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with the material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor, the capitalist imperialist ruling class. The ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule, and, subsequently, used the entire repressive forces of the state, police, courts, jails, prisons, intelligence agencies, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. We refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14th, 2021, with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the united front that will best serve our class liberation. By upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriots organization, and all other original Rainbow Coalition members, We establish our pragmatic unity. The 6 disciplinary rules that we uphold ties all organizations in our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common class mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist imperialist ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, cannot liberate us. It is their class intention and class interest to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities, who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, organizational structures, and a united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what the Second Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All members of the coalition, New African Black Panther Party, White Panther Party, Green Party of New Jersey, Poor People's Army, La Mesa Nacional de Brown Berets, NASL, North Alabama School for Organizers, New Era Young Lords, and the American Indian Movement Northeast Woodland Chapter. The 6 disciplinary rules. Number 1, members will conduct themselves in a manner to bring credit to the coalition and will treat others with respect and politeness. Number 2, members will be sober when on Rainbow Coalition business and will not engage in any criminal activity while a member. Number 3, no member will engage in violence except in the extremity of self-defense. Number 4, members will not gossip nor be divisive to the unity of the Second Rainbow Coalition. Number 5, members will not act as informers nor work against the purpose of the Second Rainbow Coalition. And number 6, nobody is authorized to speak for the Second Rainbow Coalition unless authorized to do so. And that is the statement of unity. And with that being read, our comrade here, Shanti, will begin screen sharing the PDF for everyone. Hey, Shanti, what happened?
Hey, I left on accident. I'm sorry, but I'm back.
It's fine.
I'm back.
It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry. I just made you co-host, so if you see anyone come up, you can accept them. And
Okay, bye.
and I just finished the statement of duty, so you can begin screen sharing the PDF.
Okay. Okay.
There we go. Do you want to read, or do you want me to read?
I can start reading up to like the very top of 254.
Gotcha. Right on.
All right. Here we go. Challenging the patriarchy. From the origins as a 1960s street gang, the original Young Lords was fundamentally a male organization, yet that masculine quality was never quite as pronounced in New York City. While many of the group's male members had not significantly studied the meaning of gender oppression or considered its consequences, the problem had been addressed in the Young Lords' 13-point program. The emergence of the New York group had coincided with the feminist movement's radicalization, whose shift to militant disruption a year earlier put women's equality in the front of the bus and at the center of the public dialogue. This shift in consciousness, combined with the work of the women of the Young Lords itself, made women's oppression inescapable for these radicals. Unlike other similar organizations of the period, the New York Young Lords founding political document, its 13-point program and platform, took a position on women's equality. Point 10 read, "We want equality for women. Machismo must be revolutionary, not oppressive." The formulation was odd, but it evoked Che Guevara's new man and new woman and his entreaty to revolutionaries to eradicate the quote-unquote vestiges of the past by creating enriched human relations through common struggle, mutual respect, and a deliberate process of self-education. Yet, in the thick of party life, women's equality disappeared in the gap between word and deed. In fact, patriarchal ideology was so firmly ingrained in the structure and fabric of society and the psyches of those who opposed it that it escaped detection even as the group was erecting a platform against it. Present at the Young Lords' creation, women formed a vital part of the cohort of radical students at the State University of New York College at Old Westbury, out of which the Young Lords emerged in New York. Although some are only remembered by their first names, like Yvonne, Hope, and Chris, they participated in campus protests to diversify the faculty and student body and in on-site support at the Ocean Hill-Brownsville School Experiment Project. Some, like Chris, formerly of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Denise Oliver, contributed firsthand accounts of their participation in the Southern Civil Rights Movement and knowledge of the era's influential Black thinkers and political debates. Others like Chicky Reyes and Marlene Cintron were new to organizing, but no strangers to issues of power and inequity. As part of the school's tightly knit cohort of colonized students, these women helped build a dynamic political culture on campus and participated in early discussions of Puerto Rican nationalism. When Mickey Melendez created the Young Lords' predecessor, La Sociedad Albizu Campos, many attended its meetings on campus and in East Harlem. As Denise Oliver remembers, quote, "We didn't have enough people of any one ethnicity to form a Black or Puerto Rican anything. We were all part of the non-white caucus. That included women. And everybody said, yeah, okay, cool, right on." Together with their male peers, women engaged in a process of discussion and decision-making that brought new African and Puerto Rican artists and organizers to campus. Among them, future Young Lords Felipe Luciano and Juan Gonzalez. They also participated in the series of meetings in spring and summer of 1969 that launched the Young Lords New York chapter. As the fledgling group began to implement intermission during the summer of 1969, these sunny Old Westbury women contributed their time and labor as part of the college's independent study elective in the Urban Studies program, which involved immersion in a community-based project. Marlene Cintron, for example, participated in the garbage offensive and the strategy meetings that preceded it and helped staff the office under this arrangement. She returned to Old Westbury because she did not meet the standard of commitment that being a young lord entailed. In an example of unreasonable punishment, she was summarily dismissed from the group when she did not report to her assignment one day. The reason for her absence, that she had to accompany her mother on an unexpected trip to the South, didn't seem to matter. The garbage offensive drew other women as well, among them Sonia Ivani, a young Cuban mother, college student, and first formal female member of the Young Lords, as well as Iris Morales, the wife of Deputy Chairman Felipe Luciano at the time. Morales delayed joining until months later, but was present all along and proved vital to the political development of the group. After summer hiatus, another pivotal figure, Denise Oliver, returned to the group. By September 1969, the number of new female members tripled and continued to grow slowly during the fall months. Like their male counterparts, they too would soon leave school, home, or work to become full-time members. Among them, Myrna Martinez, Connie Morales, and Elizabeth Gonzalez, Juan Gonzalez's sister. Like their male counterparts, the idea of joining the Young Lords resonated among women because they too yearned for a political home that took a stand on everything that was happening, but that was also articulated our voice and the experience of our parents. Like other women, Morales traces the roots of her politicization to childhood. Quote, "As a childhood of migrants, I thought, we don't speak the language. We don't know how to navigate the court system. We don't know how to access our rights." Morales' larger vision of politics, however, grew out of the interface between world events and her immediate world. She recalls sharing the dread of two strangers in her neighborhood who, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, stopped her to say, we're gonna go to war. Like her male counterparts, she and other women who joined the Young Lords, quote, have been involved to some extent in the Black movement and the white movement. For Morales, quote, the horrific TV images of the civil rights movement were brought home to her at Julia Richmond High School, where some of her high school peers were members of SNCC, and during her participation in a school play produced by the NAACP youth group. At around the same time, she participated in the citywide student strike of 1964 to desegregate New York's public schools. Through these programs, through these networks, she landed in the house of a Japanese American woman on the Lower East Side who spoke about her internment during World War II. In the process, she awakened to the horrific treatment of people in the history of the United States. The intangible assets that women like Morales brought to the organization had ensured its sustained success a year earlier. Yet, in many cases, their quiet skills and power were rendered invisible in the male dominant culture of the Young Lords. In the case of Morales, she was soft spoken and preferred to engage in organization building at the grassroots. Morales' marriage to the organization's charismatic chairman, Felipe Luciano, didn't help. Although the union raised her visibility, it overshadowed the indispensability of her contributions. Critics of the Young Lords' gender politics, and even some of its own members, referred to Morales as Luciano's wife. Yet Morales' organizing experience and political exposure before the Young Lords were formidable. As a teenager, she became a tenants' rights organizer with the West Side Block Association, where she worked all day and night, knocking on doors, collecting signatures, and organizing rent strikes. It was there that she committed herself to bottom-up democracy and horizontal leadership. In housing organizing, she learned that, quote, that you never talk to authorities by yourself because they will manipulate you to get you to abandon the interests of the people or turn the people against you. Right on. Morales participated in counter pickets of the teachers' union strike of 1968, which challenged its opposition to the decentralization of schools. She marched with women striking for peace and against the Vietnam War, and attended Corky Gonzalez's Crusade for Justice conference in Denver, Colorado, in the winter of 1969. Before that, she traveled to Cuba with New York's Cuban mission for the 10th anniversary of the Cuban Revolution and was invited to speak on her experience at the Real Grace Society in East Harlem, among other places. Morales also identified common cause with New Africans early on. Even though she was very fair-skinned, Morales was active in African activist struggle groups in junior high school and high school. When she enrolled at City College, she joined Onyx, the African student organization, because there was no Puerto Rican political organization on campus. Later, she was among the founders of Puerto Ricans involved in student action, which fought for the establishment of Puerto Rican studies at the school. You want to take over?
Sure. Morales and the rest, correct?
Yeah.
Morales and the rest of the women who joined the Young Lords were among its most sorry, what?
Disciplined.
Yep. Were among its most disciplined members. They answered phones, made flyers, served breakfast, distributed the group's circular, marched and on some occasions spoke at rallies, developed political curricula, and more. As discussed earlier, they were also instrumental to the success of the Young Lords' door-to-door medical home visits in East Harlem. Their presence helped soften the image of the group and ensured that homemakers opened their apartment doors to these radicals. As in the case of SNCC and the Black Panthers, the organization's dizzying volume of activity developed its members' communication skills and sharpened their political acumen. Acumen. I don't know. I've never heard that word before. Before long, the arena for challenging preconceived notions and assumptions about women's inferiority presented itself. The turning point came at the end of the church offensive, which brought a surge in female membership. By January 1970, approximately 35 to 40% of the group's members were women. Right fucking on. With this growth, the discrepancy between the young lords' professed ideals and day-to-day practices became more manifest. The exponential rise in female members made the absence of women in the group's formal leadership body more glaring. Indeed, other patterns now seemed intolerable. During the first altercation at the church before the occupation, women fought the police. As Oliver remembers, they had, quote, jumped their backs and bit their ears, unquote. Right, fucking on. Shit, where was I? Right. 5 out of 13 arrested were women, and a number of disproportionate to the percentage in the organization. The women of the Young Lords had literally proved themselves in battle. Yet when the time came to assign posts in various ministries, especially the defense ministry, they were disproportionately assigned traditional women's work. That's fucking that's male chauvinistic bullshit right there. Yep. As Dennis Oliver suggests, these patterns reflected the long-standing normalization of a profound power imbalance in the movement. Fannie Lou Hamer is a key figure in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and so is Ella Baker. They did a lot of the real work. Angela Davis was known around the world, but she didn't lead the Communist Party. By and large, all the movements were officially led by men. In fact, on issues of gender oppression and homophobia, the movement's international culture reflected the prevailing patriarchal ideas of society. Women across the movement, especially Black women and other women of color, continue to do quote unquote the work, but they had been raising the problem of sexism for over a decade. Iris Morales, shit, I fucking got lost again. Fuck me, where was I?
Who considered herself?
Sorry. Right. Wait. All right. Iris Morales, who considered herself a feminist, had long felt conflicted politically about the quote women's question in the Young Lords and its prevailing unsated belief that a woman's place was quote in the background, unquote. In fact, she had refused to join formally until about this time, but she did so after a visit to California, where women of the Brown Berets reminded her that she was already doing the work and that she might as well struggle with these issues within the organizations. As she remembers, frustration soon boiled over, and the female membership, quote, decided to get together and talk, unquote. In January 1970, the women of the Young Lords began to meet informally on Sundays, independently of men, to get to know each other better, discuss their frustration in the organization and society, and build sisterhood. Right on. They called these meetings the Women's Caucus. They were embracing a practice that had been popularized by the predominantly white second wave feminist movement, the Women's Consciousness Raising Circle, in which women gathered to analyze and explore the ways in which structures. Sorry, what?
Nothing.
In which women gathered to analyze and explore the ways in which structures of gender oppression played out in their personal lives. Oblivious to mounting tensions, the Central Committee, quote, said, go ahead, let the women go and have their hen talk, unquote. Wow. That says a lot. That fucking says a lot about about the sentiments that a lot of male young lords held.
especially at that time, because
Exactly.
this was the late 60s going into the 70s, so it was still very much a fresh change in political um ide-
Structuring.
ushering. It
Yep.
was still at that time.
Yep. And Shanti, we've talked before about how these secondary contradictions oftentimes interconnect. And this right here, the notion that women are quote unquote inferior than men, that they're less smart, that's both ableism and sexism playing a
and,
role in that fucking shit.
and the
And
gender
racism.
oh, the gender binary as well.
Yep, the
Which,
gender binary as well, and gender roles.
yep,
That fucking bullshit right there. Like I've said before, and I say again, all contradictions need to be combated. And how can an organization claim that they want liberation without combating all the contradictions of capitalism? You can't have a group of all men and have them say they're going to combat misogyny. Like that doesn't work. How can you combat an oppression that you've never faced before? It makes no sense.
exactly.
The same way how you can't have a group of all white people say they're going to fight against racism when they've never fucking faced racism in their life. Like that makes no fucking sense.
Exactly.
You need people that experience these oppressions, especially colonized people who experience these oppressions, in order to be able to fully combat and uproot the
The
these
class
reactionary sentiments from our mind, from our psychological mindset, and replace them with a dialectical and principled analysis of why these contradictions even exist in the first place societally.
it's very, very crucial.
Yep. Shit, I lost myself again. Where was I?
Have their hen talk.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Have their hen talk. Meanwhile, the caucus created a space for grievances, big and small. It addressed the ways in which machismo was manifested in the organization through its division of labor between men and women, interpersonal relationships, and the use of political power by men in the organization to sleep with women. Women began to articulate feeling humiliated and demeaned by some of their male counterparts, who routinely objectified and sexually propositioned potential female recruits, a behavior they came to denounce as sexual fascism. Yup. The Women's Caucus made explicit the men's non conscious ideology and unexamined sexism and brainstormed how to unlearn dominant gender roles and tendencies to perceive feminism as a white woman struggle and inspired each other to become leaders. That's exactly what we were just talking about.
Exactly.
When she joined the Young Lords after the church occupation, Ugly Rock. I don't know how to pronounce that first name. Oglui?
Yeah.
Oglui um, Oglui Robbles, Robbles was shy and quiet, but the gender issues discussed in women's caucuses helped her find her voice. When talked about the culture's impact on us women in terms of female passivity and how it manifests itself in 1,001 ways, we talked about the forced sterilization of Puerto Rican women and women of color in hospitals, and that you're not only a second class citizen because you're Puerto Rican, a worker.
Sorry.
It's fine. um, um, wasn't
And impoverished.
yep. Um, shit. Oh right. Second class citizen because you're Puerto Rican, a worker, and impoverished. But you're also a third class citizen because you're a woman. Getting clarity helped me fight my own tendency to sit on the background and bite my tongue and be ashamed to speak because what do I know? You know, I'm just a woman. Although it didn't happen overnight, Oglui came to understand that, quote, there was nothing wrong with sex and sexuality, unquote. Yep, there's nothing wrong with it. As of before, there's nothing wrong with masculinity. It's toxic masculinity. That's the problem.
Right, masculinity that has that bourgeois base in it. There's a
Yep,
difference between
exactly.
masculinity and masculinity with a bourgeois base in it, with with gender-based violence, with the case of the new African woman a few days ago that was attacked by a man with a brick because she refused to give him her number. This is exactly the thing, is that feeling, that complex that quote unquote men are so-called under attack, that if you turn them down, you go into automatic fight mode and essentially commit whatever kind of violence against the so-called hen. You know what I'm
Yep,
saying? If
yep,
you get turned down, your so-called manhood is under attack. You have to fight back. You know what I'm saying? And
exactly.
that's exactly right here.
Yep, that right there. That fucking right there. I've said before, and I've said it again. It's the patriarchy that tell men that they have no emotions. It's the patriarchy that tell men that they're quote unquote inherently sexual creatures that can't control themselves. It's the patriarchy that tells men to quote unquote provide for their family and not talk about about how they're feeling or how or what's troubling them. The patriarchy tells men to be like that. It's the fucking patriarchal fucking bullshit that encourages that toxic masculinity, male chauvinistic bullshit. And so,
Go.
and if you want a new society, if you want to establish a new socioeconomic system, with a new with new relations of production, social relations, and a new culture, you have to combat all the contradictions of capitalism and uproot all reactionary thought. You have to uproot everything. You have to unlearn everything through constant criticism and self-criticism of yourself and the world around you, and replace it with a principled and scientific analysis of yourself and the world around you to try and push against the grain of bourgeois thought, to try and push against the grain of white supremacist thought, of male chauvinist thought, of queerphobic thought, of ableist thought, and so on and so forth. That's what you
Exactly.
gotta do.
Exactly. You never ever leave gender out because it plays a big role in everything. Just like the concept of race, the concept of gender plays a big role in our social and political and economic realities as proletarians. You cannot leave that out. You never ever leave that out. You have to confront it not only from the perspective of women, but also with other gender and sexual variant peoples as well, because
Exactly.
that way you know what we're up against.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Fuck it. Where was I? I keep on getting fucking lost. Um,
Puerto
I think
Rican,
I was, yep, for young Puerto Rican women who were socialized in Catholic households where women's oppression was enforced through the strict policing of their bodies and the association of women's sexuality with shame, discussion in Women's Caucus deepened their analysis of power and proved liberating. The Women's Caucus met consistently through the spring of 1970, but its impact was uneven. Some women continued to do as they were told by the leadership, while others were emboldened to press their grievances. Some had come into the organization confident in their politics and ability to defend their rights as women, while others had acquired a greater sense of themselves as women organizers after joining. The most vocal female members were critical of the middle class orientation of the feminist movement and its dominance by white women in public um, in public sphere. And this is why I'm saying, even among marginalized groups, we have to listen to the colonized people within those marginalized groups, because oftentimes, even among marginalized groups, white quote unquote uh, people due to white privilege, the racial hierarchy, and white supremacy will oftentimes whitewash, co-opt, and appropriate other movements within the same marginalized groups to uphold their own white privilege. It happens all the time in the queer community, and amongst women, amongst neuro expansive communities, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
Literally. So that's what I'm saying. Even amongst marginalized groups, colonized people still have to listen and struggle alongside the colonized people within those marginalized groups. Always.
Because when it affects one, it affects everyone.
Exactly. All of these oppressions are interconnected. Like I've said before, I'll say again. I have ADHD and autism. You know, I faced ableism my entire life, but there are facets. There are facets of ableist oppression that are influenced. They're influenced by racism that I've never experienced because of my white privilege. So it's essential that we listen to colonized people because once again, I've said before, and I'll say it again, while white people are oppressed under a capitalist society, it will never amount to the oppression that colonized people experience.
Right.
Literally. I need to stop getting fucking lost. Jesus Christ.
The most vocal female members.
All right. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah, the most vocal female members were critical of the middle class orientation of the feminist movement and its dominance by white women in the public sphere. They also denounced the call among a small group of second wave feminists to build separate women-only organizations as a strategy toward women's liberation. The women of the Young Lords argued that for women of color, gender, and ethnicity the women of the Young Lords argued that for women of color, gender, and ethnicity were inextricably linked. Yup, all of these contradictions are linked. They are all intertwined together. They all connect to one another under the primary contradiction: the proletariat versus the bourgeois.
Yep, it's all in there.
They're all interconnected. You can't just fucking separate. You can't just separate women's liberation you can't just separate women's liberation and leave behind the liberation of colonized people and queer people. You can't fucking do that. If one person is oppressed, then we're all oppressed in some way.
Yep.
Simple as that. Yep. The problem of racism and national liberation, they posited, could not be resolved with half of the Puerto Rican population, but would have to be addressed by men and women together, as, quote, third world women make up over half of the Revolutionary Army. Yep. These issues were discussed in an all-women panel of the Young Lords organization, YLO, titled, quote, Women of the Colonies, unquote, that aired in May 1970 on the organization's weekly radio program, also titled Palante. Although at different times,
the panelists.
Sorry. Yep. Oh, although at different times the panelists emphasized some aspects of their identities over others, the consensus was that they were first and foremost revolutionaries committed to the freedom of all people, and were quote opposed to establishing a separate movement for women, unquote. They emphasized that from Puerto Rico to Vietnam, even when women have gone unacknowledged, they have been at the helm of the revolutions. Yep. According to a panelist, Myrna Martinez, quote, we have revolutionary sisters who have played an important part in the liberation struggle in Vietnam, alongside their men, unquote. while women of color in revolutionary nationalist organizations like the Young Lords adopted the women's movement interpretation that linked women's oppression to the institution of the family, their most politically sophisticated members are also linked the emergence of the family with class society and with capitalism. Yep.
Ding,
Gender
ding, ding.
oppression, they believe, was rooted in the organization of society. With the birth of socialism, they 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 contended gender oppression would eventually wither away. Yep. While some were familiar with with Frederick with Frederick Frederick Engels's The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, the text wasn't incorporated into the readings until at least a year later. Some middle class women's groups, some middle class women's groups disagreed with women in revolutionary nationalist organizations over the question of how to best achieve equality. The dominant liberal wing of the women's movement established the women's oppression was born of the age-old system of patriarchy. That the major division in society was that between the sexes, and that the emergence of a new social order would not automatically bring about a society free of male domination. Consequently, some argued for independent, women-only formations to combat quote-unquote male privilege. Nationalist women retorted by rejecting the notion that all men exercise privilege, arguing that by virtue of their race, most Black and Latin X-men were subjugated to greater oppressions than the ranks of middle-class women's movements. Yup, literally. They insisted that in the process of collective struggle, the question of women's oppression would be raised through day-to-day interactions between the sexes. Quote, because we are all there with men. The women's liberation question will come up since we are involved in the struggle in the day-to-day. If we have to type, we type. We don't say we're not going to do this or that. We'll do whatever is necessary. And by being involved right in there, you get rid of male chauvinism. Yep. You cannot deal with it on an abstract theoretical level. You have to deal with it concretely, and that's why we have sisters involved in every single ministry in the Lord's. While we're working, that's how we get recognition, unquote. That right fucking there. It takes both theory and praxis in order to combat the oppression the oppression of capitalism, both the primary and the secondary. Theory sharpens praxis, but praxis changes theory. It's the application of theory through practice that enables us to see what we got right, what we got wrong, what's applicable, what isn't, and what we can do to adapt our theory to our materialistic conditions, and more importantly, how we can improve upon it and make it even more applicable. That's the whole point.
Exactly.
I'm really loving this. I'm really loving this so much.
This is a good.
This is fucking amazing. This is beautiful. God, I need to catch my breath. The radio broadcast reveals that the women of the Young Lords were in the process of revising. Sorry, what?
We skipped a part.
Oh, I did. Sorry. Oh yeah. Sorry. Even though the women of the Young Lords were quote proud to be women, unquote, some argued that quote the Young Lords considered themselves first revolutionaries, second Puerto Ricans, and thirdly women, unquote. This formulation echoed the ranking of oppressions that would later become dominant in debates around the dominant in debates surrounding identity politics during the retreat from social struggle of the 1980s and 1990s. Since revolutionary nationalists emphasized and privileged the ways in which racism undermined the manhood of men of color, if pressed to declare their political loyalties, many Black and brown male nationalists would have privileged their identities as oppressed men of color. The radio broadcast revealed that the women of the young lords were in the process of revising and clarifying their ideas around women's oppression within the fight for the liberation of people of color. While at the beginning of their involvement in the organization, some women embraced the notion that they were "quote unquote" first revolutionary, second Puerto Ricans, and thirdly women by summer of 1970. In the process of challenging male chauvinism within the young lords, their position had shifted toward a more nuanced analysis of the oppressions they suffered. For now, the women sought to assess their experience of oppression. They articulated
Congruous.
incongruent ideas. Iris Morales, for example, contradicted her comrade in the same radio program when she explained that in considering national and general oppression, quote, "It's not to say that one comes before the other, both work together." Yep. Both are intertwined.
Yep.
It's not about this isn't about fucking identity politics. This is about who's the most oppressed. This is about who's being fucked the hardest. We're all being fucked. The whole point is to end fuckery as a whole for everyone.
The proletariat versus the bourgeoisie is that simple. A, B,
Yep.
C, D, E. There's no separate forms of oppression.
They're
There's
all
no
connected.
forms of oppression. They are all interconnected. No matter if you have a privilege from it, it doesn't matter because it affects every single aspect of our identities. It's not a race first struggle. It's not this gender first struggle. It's not a ability first struggle. It's not that. It's all of these ideologies of the bourgeois system intertwining with each other and how they play a big role in our social and political realities all together,
Exactly.
not separately. You cannot separate, oppression, because oppression is oppression under a class system. You cannot separate, aspects of your identity and, say like, oh, like I have privilege in this identity or I don't have privilege in this identity. They all intertwine the same way. It may be different, but the same principles, the same core principles apply to this. You cannot separate oppression. It doesn't work like
because all of it comes back to because all of it comes back to class oppression. It all derives from it all derives and interconnects between between the economic, social, and political oppression of the proletariat, of the masses. That's where it comes back. First
right.
came the idea of profit, then came the idea of racism, then came the idea of misogyny, then came the idea of ableism. That's how this fucking works.
That's essentially how it happened. You cannot separate. Once again, you cannot separate, you know, you know, um, identities from each other because they're under that same system. Even with the concept of intersectional feminism, it doesn't quite confront the problem because it's that class aspect that's missing. You cannot erase class from this because class plays a big role into how our realities are the way they are in this very moment right now. Like once again, you cannot separate, your identities into its own separate plights of fighting against oppression. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that, and it never has. And when you try to separate them, you're not only engaging in that kind of classist plight, but you're also missing out willfully on that class aspect that we all do need in order to confront our real enemies, which is the capitalist imperialist bourgeois system. Once again, you cannot separate your identities into its own plight of anti-capitalism and against oppression. It doesn't work like that.
Preach. Beautifully fucking said. You can't separate them because once again, the secondary derives from the primary, but the primary can also be found in the secondary. They're interlinked. They're intertwined. You can find class oppression within racism, within sexism, within ableism, and so on and so forth. It all derives back to class. It all
Right.
derives back to profit. That's where it all comes from.
That's where
It all goes back to the class interests of the bourgeois.
yeah,
Racism, racial hierarchy, and white supremacy came from the idea of maximizing profit.
of
Um,
maximize.
um, to colonize, oppress, subjugate, and exploit other people in other nations by saying that they're quote unquote subhuman, that they're not human beings, and therefore you can oppress them by dividing people by quote unquote racism, but by quote unquote races, and so on and so forth.
That's exactly what, especially in with disability and anti-fatness, it has its roots from racism, which has its roots in capitalism. You cannot separate anti-fatness from racism because that's where anti-fatness comes from the racialization of indigenous African people. My ancestors, when they came to our homeland and saw a lot of fat indigenous Africans, living their life and made a bourgeois ideology based on what they saw when they came to our homeland. So you cannot separate anti-fatness from racism and racism from capitalism. They are all interlinked in some way, shape, or form. It's all the same system. And that's what we have to make clear. You cannot separate your so-called privileged identities from your unprivileged identities because the same thing goes back to capitalism. It all goes back to the bourgeois class. It all goes back under that class warfare made possible by the bourgeois class. You cannot separate ecofascism from capitalism because the fact of the matter is they rely on gender oppression, on that gender hierarchy, on the gender binary, in order to maximize profit and extract resources from us, hoard our resources so that we have little to nothing, so that they can be able to commit eco warfare on our ecology, on our ecosystems, on in the oceans, in the lakes, in the rivers, in the streams, everything. It's all interlinked. There's no
Beautifully
separating.
said.
There's no separating. Period.
Yep. There's no integrating and there's no separating. You can't integrate into the system that's oppressing you, but you can't try separating from it when it still exists. You have to replace it. You have to uproot it. You have to replace it with a new system. That's the only way.
You cannot run from it. No matter where you go, you can't run from it because once again, we're all under the system. So if we are all under this system, if 8 billion people are under this system, then we do have that high potential to overthrow it and replace it with our system, with the way that the earth should run. The people and the land always they're inseparable.
Exactly. I fucking love this so much. You're awesome, Shanti.
Thank you. Morales was articulating ideas.
Yep. Morales was articulating ideas that were being discussed among radical women of color in New York and across the country, which would be published formally a few months later in the summer of 1970 by the Third World Women's Alliance and identified as the quote triple jeopardy unquote of racism, capitalism, and sexism. They also asserted their contribution as comparable to men's, especially after they earned a measure of respect from men following what they called the quote the quote police riot at the First Spanish United Methodist Church, but acknowledged that women still did not share quote equal decision making power unquote with men. And finally, as late as May 1970, they read aloud the 10th point of their platform, which invoked revolutionary machismo, but did not yet acknowledge its contradiction publicly. Now, machismo could never be revolutionary because it constitutes a form of patriarchal organized around the subordination of woman. That's what I'm fucking saying. You can't have revolutionary male chauvinism.
Exactly.
That makes no fucking sense. You can't have revolutionary machismo the same thing you can't have revolutionary racism. Like, it makes no fucking sense. It can't be.
It doesn't make any sense. It
It
doesn't
makes no
make.
fucking sense.
It makes no
That's like
sense. And
that's like saying I'm a revolutionary ableist. Like, how the fuck does that make sense? That makes no sense
like,
whatsoever.
come on, come on, really, like being eugenicist revolutionary? How violent? How false is that? I was at a political education meeting with the new area lords here in Chicago, during Pride Month when we were talking about Sylvia Rivera and her involvement with the young lords, especially with Cha Cha and the New York young lords. Um, they talked about that machismo being in the organization, especially in the New York chapter, and how Cha Cha was vehemently against it. He was vehemently against it. He was, once again, Fred Hampton was the same way. Those were the only few men that were publicly against any form of patriarchy and sexism within the Black Panther Party, within the Young Lords, within the Rainbow Coalition, period. They were vehemently publicly against it, any form of it. And so Cha Cha listened to the women of the Chicago Young Lords and made the Women's Caucus, the Gay and Lesbian Caucus, because he saw that machismo will never ever be revolutionary because it involves a form of capitalist power over people of oppressed gender experiences in order to keep in their subordination. So this is very, very important to note. We talked about this a lot. Um, Once again, you cannot separate sexism and gender oppression from capitalism because it's all under that system. So, like, you cannot, there's no way you can separate it. And there's no way you can call yourself a revolutionary, anything that is uplifting the oppression of the proletariat in some way, shape, or form. You cannot call yourself revolutionary and be an ableist. Does that make any sense? No, it does not. Because that's the point. You cannot be a macho man and be a revolutionary. You cannot be a fat phobe and be a revolutionary. There's nothing revolutionary about fat phobia. There's no such thing as being being revolutionary and being oppressive against fat people. There's no such thing. But that's the point.
Beautifully said. Fucking preach.
Although,
oh yeah. Although the panelists were confident in their exposition, their voices revealed anxiety, sometimes sounding as if they were on trial. The status of women in the Young Lords was yet uncertain and filled with contradictions. Even as the Young Lords was as yet even as women sustained the organization's day-to-day work, men responded to the influx of female membership with a range of behaviors and dispositions, from newfound respect to heightened male bravado. And even though the women of the Young Lords drew inspiration from the public face of the women's movement, they also contended with the movement's failure to sufficiently address issues of racism and class exploitation. For example, while YLO women participated in an International Women's Day rally where middle-class white women decried having been, I'm not going to say that word, by society. Sorry.
Niggerized by society.
Yep. Describing the event and the choice of words as a fiasco that, quote unquote, alienated all the third world women in attendance, the radio panelists assailed middle class white women for, quote, suggesting that they have experienced the same type of oppression and repression that Black people and third world people have suffered over hundreds of thousands over hundreds and hundreds of years. That's what I'm fucking saying. Even among the same marginalized groups, the oppression that colonizer people face, even among the same marginalized groups, will never amount to the oppression, exploitation, repression that colonized people have experienced in that marginalized groups. That's what I'm fucking saying. Even among the same marginalized groups, there are facets of that marginalized group that interconnect with other types of oppression that white people have never experienced, that they will never experience in their entire lives. That is why they need to
What
connect and struggle
about
alongside the colonized people in those same marginalized groups, because otherwise they become alienated, and they end up upholding white supremacy and the contradictions of capitalism, and they end up holding even their own oppression.
exactly? And the fact that these European American uh, bourgeois women want to say that they have been so-called N-wordized by society, which is absolutely funny to me because didn't y'all make up 40% of all people that own my people in chattel enslavement? Did y'all make up 40%? Okay, okay. Forget about that. Y'all wanna y'all want to say that, you know, like y'all have been, niggerized by society, that, y'all have been alienated. I'm very, very sorry, but like it's so funny that European American women say this because they have the same history of oppression against us. And, once again, they have made up a large number of people that owned my ancestors, that engaged in the hyper surveillance of my ancestors before they were before the modern police system. Like the fact that they would say that they've been niggerized by society, saying that out their own mouth, the same class slur that has been utilized as means of essentially calling us inferior, of an alien race, of from outer space, that we had no history, that essentially equating their so-called alienation to us, which is just comedic. It's just so comedic to me.
Exactly, exactly. I've said before, global north slash first world women, colonizer women, hold privilege over global south slash third world colonized women, and even colonized men. Literally,
Yeah,
like, like,
yeah.
like, it's so funny that these labor aristocrat, petty bourgeois, colonizer women try to equate their oppression with colonized people when they literally hold more privilege than when they literally hold more privilege than working class men in society.
It's
Literally,
and they engage in anti-trans violence with the state. A lot of them,
sex reductionism.
yeah, they engage in warfare against children, thinking that what's best for us is to essentially try to kill us off, because they don't understand that they have benefit in gender oppression, just like petty bourgeois men. They're all the same people. They're all the same people. They may be of different genders, but they're all the same people, especially trans people that have assimilated in being in conjunction with the state. They're part of the problem as well, because once again, it's not about getting representation. It's about who they can target next in order to continue the oppression of their own.
Yup,
You cannot
literally. Sorry, what?
you cannot separate it.
You
You can't.
cannot separate it. And it's actually good they just mentioned representation, because I have said before and I have said it again, representation, quote unquote, that these bourgeois fucks engage in when they quote unquote represent marginalized groups, they aren't representing them. What they're doing is that they have I've said these before, they have commodified generational trauma. They have tricked these marginalized groups to think that these that these corporations are quote unquote for them, that they support them, that they're for them. When in actuality, what they're doing is by engaging in his quote unquote representation. You want to know what they're doing? They're just angering, emboldening, and bolstering bigoted people. They're making them more angry, more violent,
Right.
and
It's ammunition. It's
exactly,
ammunition.
it's ammunition. It's ammunition for them. Um, every quote unquote representational movie that Disney fucking comes out with, it gives ammunition to white supremacists. Every single quote unquote representational fucking book or merch that these capitalists come out with, it gives ammunition to these male chauvinist fucking queer phobic shitheads. It's ammunition. It angers, emboldens, and bolsters their ranks. It gives them more reason. It gives them more reason to become militant. That's what it does.
Right. Like we've been saying this for years, and people just still don't want to listen to us. But look at what happened since March. Happy now?
Yep. Oh, Jesus. I lost where I was again.
What the
Sorry, what?
what the women's movement?
Right. With the women's movement. Is it possible for you to highlight that?
Yeah. Let me see. Right here.
Oh, there it is. What the women's movement failed to recognize, they argued, quote, is that our men are in a very precarious position, unquote, and that because of racism, quote, they've never been in a position of oppressing anybody, unquote. The same women, they reported, talked first of quote, liberation for themselves and then mankind, unquote. Throttled by a combination of internal and external factors, the YLO women were about to bring the issue of gender oppression to its boiling point. Shortly after the church offensive, Dennis Oliver was assigned the first prominent and strategic position of officer of the day, OD, after the incompetency of a male member of the group led to his dismissal from that position. The OD was charged with overseeing the day-to-day work of the organization, delegating assignments to each of its members, handling crises as they emerged, and keeping track of the sales of newspapers. Like a staff sergeant in the military, the OD was also charged with enforcing discipline both in the members and on members of the Central Committee for failure to tend to assigned duties. Therefore, as a woman in a male-dominated paramilitary-styled organization like the Young Lords, Oliver exercised rare power. Oliver was assigned the post because of her assertive disposition. Her middle-class background growing up in a radical household, which affirmed individuality and encouraged her to defend her political beliefs, armed her with the confidence to refuse duties that were disproportionately assigned to women. Unlike some women in the organization who, in Oliver's generous phrasing, quote, had to work through issues of female passivity, unquote, she was reared in a household where there was always an egalitarian distribution of chores in which her father provoked political debates with her and where, quote, nobody told her to wash the dishes while her brother read a book, unquote. Oliver recalls, quote, I never learned how to type. I didn't want to learn how to type because I didn't want to be a typecast, unquote. Her middle class background certainly allowed her the freedom to take that stance. Oliver was also known to be, quote, very organized, unquote, and fiercely serious about the work of the organization, qualities that were indispensable for the role of the OD. Oliver's work as OD gave her a bird's eye view of the organization. The position also enabled her to expand her responsibilities exponentially. Because of the broad oversight that the position required, the OD worked closely with the members of the Central Committee. I just saw Wait, he's gone. Again. I was gonna ask. I'm pretty sure that's Andy. I was
Oh,
gonna ask him if he wanted to read, but he left. I think he's having technical difficulties.
okay.
During during the tenure as OD, Oliver became especially aware of the gender assumptions made privately by the Central Committee about who could and who could not perform particular tasks. She also came to understand that, quote, part of the problem wasn't just that men automatically took the sort of macho role, but that women were used to submissive behavior and weren't opening their mouths, unquote. It was this experience, in part, that led to the emergence of the Women's Caucus. Um,
We used to talk.
Caucus. Quote: We used to talk about some of the young women in the organization, what we would need to do to get them to speak up, to take a more forward-moving role, not to drop to the back, not to defer to male privilege. Unquote. The male-centric culture of the group encouraged the learned passivity of the least confident and self-aware female members, even as it even as it provided openings for its more politically confident female members like Oliver. Iris Morales would also play a key role in the organization's debates on women's oppression. Like Oliver, Morales was influenced by her father, but for different reasons. Whereas Oliver's childhood home subverted the traditional gender roles of the 1950s, Morales is um, reified them. Did they pronounce it reified?
Reified.
Morales has reified them. I'm guessing that's another word for refined, I think. Her experience growing up in a very traditional working class Puerto Rican household predisposed her to setting straight the organization's internal double standard on women's equality. Like, sorry,
Many of the young people.
yep. Um, like many of the young people who swelled the ranks of the organization, her parents, her parents came in the large wave of post-war Puerto Rican migration. In Puerto Rico, her father had been a can cutter. In New York, he found work first as a dishwasher and later as an elevator operator in New York's hotel industry. This frame worker turned proletarian identified men as patriarchs and assumed exclusive power at home and in the world. His traditional worldview was rocked by the overnight reorganization of family life in an urban setting. Back on the island, Iris's mother, Almida, who cared for her and nine young siblings, Iris's uncles. But to make ends meet in New York, Morales' mother worked as a seamstress. Financial necessity functioned as an equalizing force. The new arrangement challenged. Also, give me 1 second. I want to see if we I want to see if we're going over. I just want to see. Okay, no.
Yeah.
We stop at page 269.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Um um her father's exclusive, right?
Yeah.
Her father's exclusive authority in the home. Eventually, Almeida struck out alone and raised her four daughters as a single mother. Speaking of the power relations in their family, Iris observes there's a saying in Spanish to the effect that children should speak only when spoken to. The mother's just one step above the children, and then there's machismo, so that the man feels he has to go out with with other women. There were no sons in my family. My father was the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son. I was supposed to be a son, but I wasn't. And then there were no sons to carry on the family name. So I guess that's one of the reasons he started running around trying to develop a son somewhere else. The Catholic Church is another thing too. you have to go through all the rituals, even if your family is not into a deeply religious bag. Everything is a sin. You get that on top of the strictness and the patriarchy, the kind of the kind of controls they have over you. When I decided to leave home, that was a scandal in the family. But it was worth it because now I can see what is happening. Given the defining role that gender played in her childhood, it is no surprise that Morales refused to pander to the notion that national liberation should be privileged over women's liberation. Yep, women's liberation and national liberation are interconnected.
Hide. You can't. Once
Yep,
again, cannot separate them.
you cannot separate them.
Work that
Liber-
way.
um, um, National liberation without social or cultural liberation will always lead back to privilege and not liberation. Simple as that.
And oppression.
Yep, and oppression. Um, as Deputy Minister of Education, she asserted considerable political power, re-educating members on a range of issues, helping develop the organization's internal curriculum, developing classes for the community, and leading discussions. Ironically, the early political education sessions of the organization didn't address issues of gender, even though a woman was helping to create and lead them. But the young lord's philosophy of education, that the process of political education alongside struggle would engender enlightened individuals prepared for the task of building a new just society, opened up a world of critical analysis on women's oppression that eventually drowned out those who were against the organization's focus on women's issues. In fact, it inspired in its female members a desire to understand social relationships, the specific condition of women's oppression among women of color, and the influence of class, culture, and history in the gendered system of oppression. Beginning in the spring of 1970, the Young Lords began to use in-depth articles written for Palante in the political education of new recruits. In the area of women's oppression and leadership, Palante articles discuss the state-led campaign in Puerto Rico that used women's sterile that sorry, I lost where I was.
Women's sterilization as a form.
Could you highlight that? Oh, never mind, I found it. Women's sterilization as a form of contraception deconstructed the institution of the concubine in Puerto Rico as oppressive gender logic, featured the biographies of political leaders such as Puerto Rican political prisoner Lolita Lebron and the Black American freedom fighter Junior Truth. Oh, I watched one of the documentaries on her, and she's fucking awesome as hell. Love her speeches. The obviously the education system doesn't teach much on 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 political figures, but surprisingly, in my school, we watched Ain't I a Woman by her, and it was really powerful.
Oh yeah, yep.
Fighter Junior Truth, and in a sophisticated article on the politics of and when there's a picture of motivations for the U.S. invasion of Cambodia in 1970, featured a photograph of armed female Cambodian guerrillas. And in response to being called, quote, young ladies, unquote, and Robin Morgan's classic essay, Goodbye to All of That, in Rat, a New York-based underground newspaper whose editorial board was taken over by second-wave feminists, the female members of the YLO mounted a a fervent campaign in defense of themselves and their organization. The challenge deepened the already existing internal struggle within the organization over the place women would occupy in it. Jesus. Responding in the feminist critique by women and revolutionary nationalist organizations, the Young Lords emphasized that race and class created a complexity in their oppression which could not be understood or analyzed by white feminism. Yup. They
Exactly.
argued, and and that's what you were saying about ableism and going against the fucking white supremacist fucking understanding of ableism. So yeah.
This is exactly what we mean.
You can't understand oppression through the lens of white supremacy and the oppressor. You can't. That's impossible.
You can't. You have to understand it straight from the source. You have to understand it
Yep.
straight from the Cambodian women, straight from the Vietnamese women, straight from the African women, straight from the native women of Abya Yala. You have to understand it from us because you cannot get it from white feminism. You cannot get it from second wave feminism. You cannot get it from bourgeois feminism. You can't, because it's all about uplifting that oppressive ideology that still affects us to this day. and it's reaching
Exactly.
and it's reaching fever pitch, especially within these borders, with with the Cop City indictment and the anti-trans violence, by the state, and the police violence going on in New York, in Chicago with the migrant crisis trying to pit poor Africans against the so-called illegals, which are actually native and African political migrants from the global south part of Yayawa. You cannot you cannot separate that. You cannot understand that from a bourgeois feminist perspective. Feminism is not even going to explain it for you because its main basis is uplifting the bourgeois aspects of gender and sex and sexuality. You cannot understand it from that perspective. You have to go straight to the source. You have to go straight to us that are actually in these conditions to actually understand what our conditions entail under this system. You cannot get it from a bourgeois understanding.
Literally, you can't. Like I've said before, and I said again, for colonizer people to actually engage in revolution, we have to betray our white privilege and learn alongside
You have
colonized people and live within their materialistic conditions to understand what they're going through and understand through their lens. That's what Che Guevara did. That's what he did when he traveled.
suicide.
When he traveled through because remember Che Guevara came from a petty bourgeois upper class white family. He wasn't really surrounded much by any colonized people. So, and it's not surprising that he held some pretty racist sentiments growing up in that kind of socioeconomic background, you know. But after he traveled throughout South America and lived amongst the colonized people and saw the oppressions that they were facing both in the global South and in the global North, because he also visited Miami as well. It changed him.
Exactly.
He betrayed his white privilege. He committed class suicide, true class suicide. He struggled alongside the colonized people.
That's what you're supposed to do to
Yep.
to uh to stand in solidarity and fight along colonized people is to betray your white identity, to betray
Mm-hmm.
your privilege, to betray whatever privilege you have and struggle amongst us. That's why there's comrades. There's no such
Mm-hmm.
thing as an ally or an accomplice. They are ammunition against revolution. They do not understand um the bourgeois system and their oppression without committing class suicide. Essentially, an ally and an accomplice is one that is a person that claims to be for revolution but not betrayed their class privilege or their uh, bourgeois understanding of our current world under this bourgeois system. You have to betray your privilege. You have to commit class suicide because if you don't, you're going to be stuck, not understanding a damn thing at all. And so it's very important that to combat your white privilege, actually reclaiming your roots, who you actually are, not what the bourgeois system wants you to be, just because of what you look like. You know what I'm saying? Like, Che Guevara was, I
Part
believe,
Basque and part Irish.
part Basque and Irish, Basque and Irish. Like, but he didn't have that understanding growing up.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up in that petty bourgeois background, so he didn't understand his roots until he actually started engaging in the revolution. That he truly saw where he came from and committed class suicide because he understood where he came from and to struggle alongside colonized people, to struggle alongside Congo Angola, to struggle alongside the Cuban people, to struggle alongside the Bolivian people. Like that is what um, it is. Betraying your privilege and committing class suicide in order to fight alongside the people that are actually in these conditions, the most oppressed under these conditions, for a new world, for a
Like
new
John Brown.
Yep, John Brown, Che Guevara, many others that have been racialized as being white and learned who they truly
Eugene
were.
Debs.
Eugene Debs, Hy Thurman, William Featherspoon, Marilyn Buck and Mead. Like, come on.
Indeed. Indeed. Right. Oh, and thank you for highlighting it, by the way.
I remember this time.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Let me see. So we're on page 261. They argued that the mainstream of the women's liberation movement did not, for example, take into account the exploited condition of third world women who, by virtue of racism, were disproportionately demeaned as sex workers and used as a cheap source of labor with significantly lower wages than white women. Yup.
Ding, ding,
Yep.
ding. There you
Right
go.
there. Despite their continuous rejection of the politics of what they called right wing
Women's
right wing women's group, the internal politics of the YLO were heavily influenced by the various factions of the women's movement, which had succeeded in making women's equality a central conversation in American society. Sorry, wait, let me just there we go. Come on. Why isn't that going up? There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. I was having some
yeah,
technical difficulties. The women of the young lords also became aware of their own blind spot, allowing the language of point 10 in the organization's platform to stand unchallenged. According to Oliver, amid debates and discussions in the Women's Caucus, quote, we looked in our own faces and we could kick ourselves. We had allowed we had allowed this thing that said machismo should be revolutionary, not oppressive. It became patently clear to us that that was the the stupidest thing we had read in our lives, and we had let it slide by. They didn't mean anything by it. They were trying to be feminist in that statement, but we realized it was not. Unquote. Yep,
Yeah,
exactly. You can't
yeah.
have revolutionary. We can't have revolutionary machismo the same way you can't have revolutionary racism. It doesn't work. You can't be revolutionary
What we
while also. Sorry.
That's exactly what we talked about. Like machismo, revolutionary, not
Makes no sense.
oppressive. I need everyone to really, really think about how ridiculous that sounds. Right? Proclaim if you think it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous because what did machismo come from? The oppression of native people by the Italian and Spaniard, Portuguese, and French forces in Abya Yala that made them into this monolithic brown people, this brown white people that they're not, stripping them of their native identity and adopting these roles and these ideologies that are still affecting native people of oppressed gender experiences to this very day. This is exactly what we mean. Once again,
Yep.
really think of how ridiculous that sounds, how false it sounds, because that's the point. You cannot be a macho man and be a revolutionary. It does not work like that. Hell, there are even women that do engage in machismo, that do have internalized misogyny, to be on the side of the oppressors in the context of gender. There are some women that do engage, that do boldly engage in it, and once again, like, that's not revolutionary. It's ridiculous. And it should be proclaimed as ridiculous. And I'm very, very glad that they finally saw how fucking ridiculous it was.
Preach. Beautifully fucking said.
Because that's exactly what it is. That's
It's
exactly what
ridiculous.
machismo comes from Latinidad. It comes from mestizaje. It comes from the oppression of native people. It comes from the oppression of native people. That's where it comes from. And the fact that Puerto Ricans are a mix of that many Puerto Ricans are of Taino blood. Like, hello, can we put two and two together here?
They're indigenous. That's what they are.
No matter how much Taino blood they have in them, they are Taino. Period. So this very much goes into what they face on their homeland of Puerto Rico. The machismo and the pigmentocracy on that island, and stripping diasporicans from their homeland, from their own people on their homeland. That's essentially what it is right here. It's not revolutionary. It never will be, no matter how hard you try. It doesn't make sense.
Beautifully said. I'm really glad that they called out because they mentioned it in other chapters before, but they're really getting into it now.
Right.
Uh they realized that machismo, like racism, couldn't be reformed. It had to be abolished altogether. Exactly. That's what we're saying. It has to be abolished. It has to be
Completely.
destroyed.
Completely.
It has to be uprooted and replaced by a new society, a new culture, new social relations, new economic systems, new mode production, new everything through cultural revolution. That's what needs to fucking happen. It cannot be reformed. You cannot make oppression revolutionary. That will never fucking happen. Revolutionary is the antithesis of oppression. It cannot be. You cannot have revolution with oppressive characteristics. That's not how it fucking works. You can't have that.
It has to be
Ugh.
a complete class suicide system.
Yep. It has to be its very antithesis. It's opposite altogether.
Class suicide is imperative.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it should
Very
happen.
imperative.
And
Very
think and
imperative.
once again, thankfully, they saw through it and finally, you know, recognized how ridiculous it was because, they, once again, allowing um, that oppressive sentiment to, slide by, not truly understanding that it's not so-called feminists, at all. Because because that's the thing with these male so-called allies. You know what I'm saying? Saying that they're feminists, that they're for gender liberation, but they're not understanding the class analysis of it all, the class understanding of it all. They're just calling themselves, so-called male feminists, um, not having a complete bourgeois understanding of what is actually going on.
Beautifully said. Point 10 also read, our men must support their women in their fight for economic and social equality and must recognize that our women are equals in every way within the revolutionary ranks. The 13-point program's paternalistic language and attempts to sanitize quote unquote machismo was a response among men of color to the politics of manhood as one of the highest expressions of social power in American society. The concept of manhood invests men with power and with a great sense of responsibility as breadwinners, heads of households, and, and, and protectors of women and children. For young men of color whose manhood is daily um, for men, for young men of color whose manhood is daily undermined by racism, hyper masculinity is a coping mechanism, a means of overcompensating for a social deficit. Yep, literally. Similarly, in the context of a patriarchal society where women are regulated to supporting roles in the social order, the struggle against racism is often filtered primarily through the lens of men of color struggling to establish their manhood and humanity. According to Iris Morales, these were the prevailing ideas within her cohort of movement activists. Quote, the belief was that the fight for liberation required that men take lead because they had been beaten so bad by the white man, unquote. Uh, Amid this awakening and tug of war over the issue of women's inequality within the group, a backlash emerged from a fraction of the men of the organization who grew angrier as women's grievances gained a greater hearing. The backlash took many forms. The most common happened interpersonally between men and women in the organization who were dating each other. In, in one rare instance, a male young lord slapped his partner for pushing the issue. On another occasion, at a martial arts class, the women of the young lords were were, punitively punched in the abs by some of the men who resented their efforts. Another Others ignored women when they spoke at meetings. The main argument against those who advocated that the lords had to address women's inequality internally positioned that, quote, women's issue, unquote, was divisive and an expression of middle class white feminist movement, which had little to offer the struggle for the liberation of people of color. They're literally, that right there, that male chauvinistic bullshit, they're literally trying to, to, to portray the oppression and calling out of male chauvinism by colonized women as white feminism. That's what they're trying to do.
Right.
That's what they're trying to do right here. It's fucking disgusting. This view held primarily quote by men and some women of the lords. Some men, however, were supportive of the women's grievances and genuinely sought to reform their sexist behavior. In May 1970, the women of the organization presented a series of demands to the formal leadership of the Young Lords, the Central Committee, red drafting point 10 of the 13-point program, the election of a woman to the Central Committee, and the representation of women in all levels of leadership. the punishment of sexist behavior in the ranks of the Young Lords membership, the formation of a gay caucus, as well as men's and women's caucuses for addressing the problems of sexism within the organization, and equal participation of women as writers and public speakers. That's what I'm saying. You have to combat contradictions both externally and internally.
Yep.
You cannot combat oppression when you yourself still have a bourgeois mentality and a bourgeois thought about oppression. You have to unlearn it through struggling alongside the, the, these oppressed groups, engaging with them and unlearning these sentiments through struggling alongside them and engaging in organizing and in class agitation. That's what you have to do. Cultural
That's,
revolution,
yep.
self-criticism and criticism.
Yep, that's exactly what we talked about at the beginning of the Pride Month discussions for political education here with the new area young boys. That's exactly what we talked about with Sylvia Rivera's history with the young boys. That's like the formation of the gay caucus and the men's and women's caucuses. Like that's exactly what we discussed um, in the first Pride Month discussion in regards to that. That's exactly what we talked about.
Exactly. Also, Shanti, it's been a moment. Shanti, do you want to read for a second? If that's okay with you?
Yeah, sure. Go
I sorry, what?
go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, do you know where you are? Do you know where you left off?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
All right. One of the points also referred to the unequal participation of women in the defense ministry. In the words of Iris Morales, this area was quote a male bastion, whose challenge by the women of the organization held great symbolic value. The Central Committee agreed to discuss these demands at its May conference. On the issue of women's oppression, the Young Lords Party heeded the call in spirit, but the issue of gender equality remained a contested terrain throughout the organization's life. The leadership conceded that, quote, the attitudes of superiority that brothers had towards sisters would have to change. Consequently, the clause on, quote, revolutionary machismo was struck from the article on women's oppression in the group's 13-point program and platform and replaced with a direct and resolute position in support of women's equality that read, down with machismo and male chauvinism. The revised point 10 was also moved up to become point 5 of the 13-point program. The organization also agreed to mount an aggressive campaign to re-educate its members and challenge men and women to defy socially prescribed gender roles. As Oliver explains, one of these would be a men's caucus. Quote, men's caucus came after we recognized that it was all well and good that women were changing, coming to grips with their own passivity, coming to grips with learning how to say no to machismo, asserting themselves, but that doesn't do you any good if men aren't changing right along with it. And how do you change men? Men are going to have to take responsibility for changing themselves. That was later when the Men's Caucus was established, and that was after the change on the Central Committee. While the Women's Caucus endeavored to build female leadership, the Men's Caucus attempted to teach men, quote, to cook, to care for children, to be open to cry and show emotions, because these are all good things needed to build a new society. It is. The caucuses also incorporated sex education. In them, the men learned what was, to many of them, an abstract concept, that their obliviousness to women's sexual pleasure was a manifestation and dimension of male domination of women. The organization's lesser known gay caucus began to meet spontaneously in the summer months of 1970. It did so without leadership's approval and was an initiative of a handful of the organization's openly gay members, including Miriam Dilliot and Carmen Flaca Moreno. According to Carlito Wolvera, many were in the defense committee, not because they were butch, but because they needed to prove themselves. A year earlier, during a routine police raid at the West Village's Stonewall Inn, Stonewall, y'all, a bar that catered to the marginalized segments of the gay and transgender communities, mostly colonized peoples, patrons have fought back against acts of violent humiliation. The 6 days of protests and nighttime riots that followed tipped the balance in the long-standing homophile movement. The resistance emerged out of the shadows and away from the politics of assimilation, attaining visibility in the streets and affording a structural critique of gay and transgender oppression. By late fall 1969, the efforts of the newly formed Gay Liberation Front, named after the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, have been acknowledged by the Young Lords and the Black Panthers. All were calling for unity among all oppressed people and the end to capitalism. Much of this unity coalesced at the People's Church, whose revolutionary revelry drew the radical ring of the gay movement as well as gay and transgender colonized peoples. Sylvia Rivera, a self-proclaimed transvestite and protector of homeless gay and transgender youth and sex workers on the Lower East Side, and also Sylvia Rivera is also Afro-Taino, Boricua, and Venezuelan, began developing a relationship with the Young Lords at the church. Immediately thereafter, Rivera faced death threats for a case she filed against a prison guard in the Tombs, to whom she witnessed beating an inmate. When she sought protection from the Young Lords, the Defense Ministry assigned 2 of its members to her. Alternating shifts, Carlito Rivera and the Dominican member, Marta Duarte, served as Rivera's bodyguards for approximately a week. Rivera's account of his experience offers a window into the complexity of the gay, lesbian, and transgender struggle within the movement, along with its possibilities. He remembers, quote, other members declined the assignment. Marta accepted. I freaked out, but I was a soldier. At one point, we had to a party hosted by the queen she was living with, David, on East 10th Street. Before we go in, she tells me, don't go into a panic. They're not going to bite you. Mind you, I'm 15. So we go in and I tense up at the first question I hear. Ooh, is he your date? Sylvia responds, no, he's my security. Then they all yell, can we have him? She says, no, he's off limits. He's a young lord. Y pa que eso? They all go crazy. That assignment was a gateway of understanding for me. Sylvia Rivera formed part of the Young Lords as a friendly traveler. Despite the Young Lords' genuine declarations of solidarity, LGBTQIA plus issues remain shrouded in taboo within the organization. Battles waged around women's oppression, however, opened the path to the creation of the Gay Caucus and discussions of homophobia and heteronormativity. Opposed by some and feared by many, the Gay Caucus was actively defended by Pablo Guzman and Denise Oliver. Both attended meetings of the Third World Gay Revolution, whose manifesto a year later called for a social society and, quote, the abolition of the institution of the nuclear family. Right fucking on, because the nuclear family is a colonialist creation. The caucuses, which aimed to refashion the culture of the group and the behavior of its members, never became institutionalized. The organization did, however, adopt a policy against gender discrimination and sexual misconduct. Sexist behavior in the organization was denounced formally, and those engaging in it were charged, tried, and disciplined by an internal disciplinary body. According to Addis Morales, the formalization of the Young Lords' official position on women's oppression reverberated outside the organization. Within the growing Puerto Rican movement, the Young Lords were accused of taking attention away from the colonial question and from mainland racism against Puerto Ricans. Similar critiques were leveled against the group for its focus on racism within the Puerto Rican community against Afro-Boricuas and New Africans. The Young Lords contributed to a political conversation that was unpopular at the time, but that has since been adopted broadly within Puerto Rican circles. As Morales observes, quote, thinking on it now, the Lords made a real contribution. We kept saying if we're going to change society, we have to change ourselves. I challenge you to study any of the movement pictures of the time in terms of the other organizations, and especially the organizations in Puerto Rico, and you'll see a total absence of women and Afro-Puerto Ricans in leadership. With this newfound focus on women's unique struggles within both Young Lords and society, in May 1970, Denise Oliver became the first woman elected to the Central Committee. First serving as Minister of Finance and later Minister of Economic Development, she and her ascendants reflected both the struggle over the role of women in the organization and her own broad political experience, confidence, and wide ranging knowledge and skills. Oliver's experience in the New African struggle mattered. It conferred on her a measure of respect that few other women in the organization enjoyed. In addition, in an organization that stressed the importance of revolutionary theory, Oliver had greater knowledge of classic theoretical texts than many of the men and had already been exerting political leadership. Because she had lived a life of struggle in the movement and had straddled many worlds, Oliver's election was also a strategic choice for the Young Lords' Central Committee. According to Felipe Luciano, Denise knew how to live the double life, one of the revolutionary, one of the streets, and then she knew just about everyone there was to know in the Black movement. Remember, when you're thinking of a central committee, let's make it equivalent to a board of directors. You need someone who has access, you need someone who has skills, and you need someone who is a worker. She fulfilled all of those things. Plus, she was close to us, so there was really no other choice. In the atmosphere of veil danger and suspicion produced by police infiltration of other radical organizations, trust was the paramount requisite for the appointed leadership of organizations like the Young Lords and the Black Panthers. In the words of Felipe Luciano, quote, Denise hung with us when we were nothing. And the one thing about Puerto Ricans that you can put your money on is their understanding of loyalty. Denise had been with us from student days. There were other women of comparable political experience, but no one as close to us as Denise. Denise was family. As we will see, not long after the Young Boys began to organize at Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx, a young Puerto Rican woman, Carmen Rodriguez, died in July 1970 at the hospital following an abortion procedure performed by an inexperienced and likely overworked medical intern. The combined impact of Rodriguez's death, the challenge posed by white feminists to the YLO's female members, and the growing influence of women on the culture and the organization through the two key positions held by Oliver and Morales, as well as the increase in female membership, led to the production of one of the most lucid public documents in the Young Lords' history, the position paper on women. The position paper reflected a new feminist analysis that linked the origins of women's oppression to the institution of marriage and the nuclear family under capitalism. The Young Lords, however, emphasized the distinct experience of poor women of color and their historically racialized roles as being both cheap labor and sexual objects. Class and race, they argued, were major concerns for colonized women. The paper also critiqued the social expectation that Puerto Rican wives be pure and virginal at marriage, have children to enhance Puerto Rican men's self-concept of virility, and maintain the family name and honor. They also explored the negative consequences of these socially prescribed roles on the sexual freedom of these women. As the keepers of family honor, women had to sacrifice sexual pleasure while their husbands received sexual gratification from concubines, a common institution in Latin America known as la torqueja, described by the Young Lords as a man's, quote, sexual instrument. The position paper also sought to explain the socially prescribed roles of New African and Puerto Rican men. Colonized men, they wrote, were perceived as rough, athletic, and sexual, but not as intellectuals, and certainly not employable by capitalism. In other words, lumpens. They explained how this racialized gendering affects the way in which colonized men oppress colonized women. Quote, all of the anger and violence of centuries of oppression, which should be directed against the oppressor, is directed at the Puerto Rican woman. The aggression is also directed at daughters. Finally, the document condemned the state-sponsored campaign of forced sterilization among Puerto Rican women. Sterilization of women was one of the many consequences of Operation Bootstrap, as it made Puerto Rico a laboratory for testing economic strategies in Latin America, such as often unethical research on birth control methods such as the pill and sterilization technology that later became widespread elsewhere in the world. The sterilization campaign of Puerto Rican women was supported ideologically by the American eugenics movement, which sought to control the ratio of, quote, socially undesirable people in society. Using contemporary statistics, which reported that 1 out of 3 Puerto Rican women were sterilized, the Young Lords tried to highlight how the interconnection of race, colonization, and gender shaped Puerto Rican women's oppression. Right on. Because the Young Lords perceived their community to be threatened by a government-sponsored campaign of genocide, they had a split and perhaps nuanced view of abortion. The perceived threat of genocide fostered indirect arguments against abortion. The women of the Young Lords argued that because of poverty, the decision to have a child could not be made freely by colonized women. The affordability of a child was always at stake. However, they argued that poverty even made legal abortions unsafe. Quote, abortions in hospitals that are butcher shops are a little better than the illegal abortions our women used to get. The first abortion death in NYC under the new abortion law was Carmen Rodriguez, a Puerto Rican sister who died in Lincoln Hospital. Her abortion was legal, but the conditions in the hospital were deadly. The document continued, quote, we believe that abortions should be legal if they are community controlled, if they are safe, if our people are educated about the risks, if doctors do not sterilize our sisters while performing abortions. On the basis of what they perceived as a genocidal threat, the Young Lords also disagreed with the position of the women's movement on abortion. Denise Oliver explained, quote, we feel we can't have a dogmatic approach on abortion. It will be incorrect for us to either be completely in favor of abortion or completely against it. Their attention to their own community struggles was, in this case, a disadvantage. The Young Lords failed to appreciate the broader political significance implicit in a legal decision around abortions that legislation would either extend or curtail the power of the state in general, and in particular over women's bodies. Despite the short-sightedness, the Young Lords articulated a comprehensive reproductive rights program calling for access to adequate health care, child care, community control of abortion clinics, and contraception options alongside education geared at raising consciousness about state-sponsored sterilization campaigns that disproportionately targeted colonized women and Puerto Rican women in particular. More clearly than that of any nationalist group of the period, their analysis offered potent connections not only to broader issues of race, gender, and class, but between those issues and the democratic controls of local institutions. Months later, the organization established its women's union, whose purpose was to hold meetings on issues of women's inequality in the community, initiate a community-run childcare center, and publish La Luchadora, the Female Warrior, a short-lived newspaper. La Luchadora featured the work of the women's union in the community and addressed theoretical issues related to women's oppression and the organization's 12-point program on women, which embraced a broad spectrum of demands that reflected the interests of poor colonized women. Among other reforms, the 12-point program called for full employment and equal pay for women with daycare facilities provided by the work institution, welfare centers run by community workers to ensure the protection of women and their needs, and an end to the oppression of prostitutes and drug-addicted sisters, withdrawal of the American military from our communities, and an end to their sexual abuse of women, freedom of all political prisoners and prisoners of war, and an end to sexual brutalization and torture enforced on sisters by prison officials, an end to experimentation and genocide through sterilization, forced abortions, contraceptives, and unnecessary gynecological exams. True education of her story as women, the right to defend ourselves against rapes, beatings, muggings, and general abuse, and a socialist society. In the realm of consciousness raised on issues of race and gender, Palante played a pivotal role internally among its members and externally among broader audiences. The Young Lords deployed political education as a vehicle for personal transformation, pending revolution, and for overcoming divisions among oppressed people and within the working class. When the media spotlight was on their occupations and they became quote unquote famous, they pushed the strategic power of the media and began to make the media work for them. What had begun as focused local actions around social and economic issues became a program and platform around a radical set of issues, including race and gender equality, disseminated first through a newspaper, then through radio and film. Picked up by the mainstream and movement media, this was their virtual platform. Their typewriters and flyers were thus precursors in a way to today's social media. In their literature, and activism, the Young Lords challenged expressions of racial prejudice among racially oppressed people as a precondition for unity among third world people. In their adaptation of the notion that quote unquote the personal is political to their experience of racism, they explored its personal and psychological consequences for colonized peoples. The group also broadened the nation's understanding of race ideology. The very presence in the movement of radicals like the Young Lords, who were socialized under a system of, of racial formation that emerged in Latin America, challenged New Africans and European Americans to step outside of their United States, centered in narrow grasp of race and identity. On the question of gender inequality, the women of the Young Lords forced changes in the structure, rules, and global vision statement of their gender integrated organization. Their methods and approach differed from those of their female counterparts within the New Left. White, second wave feminists formed separate women's organizations, and the women of the Black Panthers critiqued their interlocking nature of race and gender oppression under capitalism, though they did not institutionalize gender specific policies and rules within their organization. The Young Lords stood apart as their members struggled with misogyny within the organization, working to foreground the experience of class and racial oppression in public discourses on women's inequality in US society.
And we're done. Oh, that was awesome. Good job, Shanti. That was fucking beautiful.
Thank you.
God, they went over so much over here, and everything was just beautiful. I've said before, and I say again, and that's what's said multiple fucking times throughout this whole thing. You cannot have economic liberation without also having social and cultural and political liberation. You cannot just replace the economy if you still have people that are racist, misogynistic, ableist, and queerphobic. Because what's going to happen? It's going to lead back to the formation of the primary contradiction between the bourgeois and the proletariat. It will lead back to it. It will always lead back to class oppression. You cannot separate these contradictions from each other. The secondary derives from the primary, but the primary is found within the secondary. They're interlinked. They are connected. They all operate under the same oppressive socioeconomic system. It needs to be uprooted completely. We need decolonization, not just decolonization, not just socioeconomically, but psychologically. We need to unlearn our reactionary sentiments because we have lived under a capitalist society our entire lives. So it will take constant self-criticism and constant class struggle and constant engagement and practice to fully unlearn our bourgeois thought. That takes years to fully rid yourself of bourgeois thought. It takes years, decades to do so.
Because it surrounds us. It surrounds us, and since we're under it, the school system, the workplaces,
media,
the nonprofit, entities, the police system, um, and other pig entities, because it surrounds us, we psychologically become a part of it. And so we take whatever they give to us, and we accept it as a way of life. But it's not a way of life. It's fabricating reality and making us live a fantasy world. Just like the uptick of gendered violence against African women within the past year. With Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez, with the new African woman that was attacked by a brick because she wouldn't give a man her number. An end to capitalism also means an end to gender-based violence. An end to capitalism also means the end of sexual violence against fat African children. An end to capitalism also means the end of all sexual violence amongst each other, because capitalism relies on violence in order to sustain itself. They rely on gendering people as being men, telling them that their manhood is, sacred. That if a woman turns you down, if they turn you down, then you're under attack. You have to fight back. You have to defend yourself. You have to amp yourself up. You know what I'm saying? You have to be macho. You have to be better than that. You have to attack this woman. You have to beat this woman. You need to rape this woman. You have to beat this person. And that is what we have been brainwashed to think, that our manhood, that our womanhood is under attack, in quotes, that this fantasy world that has been promoted to us since being gendered from the womb, having to uphold these reactionary gender identities, being told that, if we don't uphold to these identities, then we'll be discarded. And that's what happens with gay youth. That's what happens with lesbian youth, bisexual youth, pansexual youth, trans youth, queer youth. That's what happens to us. We become the lumpins that way because our parents have been so deeply brainwashed by the capitalist forces that they've lived under as children themselves, that they take it out on the next generation that comes up. As long as this system exists, youth will continue to be oppressed. We will continue to be in the guillotine of 9 people. We will continue to be under the guillotine of our parents, of the elders that have failed us, that have continued to attack us, to oppress us as being part of the problem, not understanding that we have more understanding of who we are than what they ever will have. And the end to capitalism is an end to sexual violence, to gender-based violence, and to the violence against children and youth and babies and infants, because we defy what the bourgeois class wants us to be. For the past 531 years, 531 years, which means that it's not human beings alone responsible for why the world is the way it is right now. It's the bourgeois system. And the more that we continue blaming humanity alone, the more ammunition they have. And it's very, very important that we have that understanding of gender as a class struggle, to have that understanding of race as a class struggle, to have sexism as a class struggle, health as a class struggle, fat phobia as a class struggle, ableism, disability as a class struggle that intertwines with every other form of oppression under a capitalist imperialist system that we're in under around the world right now. Just like what's going on in Greece, just like what's going on in Morocco right now, what happened to Turkey, what's
Hawaii.
going on Hawaii, what's going on in Boriken, what's going on in
Cuba.
Cuba, what's going on in Jamaica, what's going on in Ecuador, what's going on in Brazil, what's going on with the DNA people, what's going on with Florida. It all interconnects. And a continuation to capitalism is more gender-based violence, more gender fascist ammunition against the people that are diehards for the bourgeois system, no matter if they're homeless, no matter if they're poor, no matter if they're part of the proletariat, no matter if they're part of the bourgeois forces. It doesn't matter because they will do anything and everything to uphold the bourgeois system that continues to kill our women, that continues to kill trans people, that continues to kill queer people, children, youth, working class people, poor people, homeless people, new Africans, Boricuas, West Papuans, Palestinians, Cambodians, the Chinese proletariat, the Indian proletariat in India, the Vietnamese women and girls that were faced under sexual violence in the Vietnam War, and many, many others. Because mark my word, a continuation of capitalism is a continuation of class warfare amongst each other, and gender plays a big role in it. And as long as we don't confront it, as long as we don't understand, as long as we don't have that class understanding of gender, we will continue to be under the brunt of gender-based oppression, racialized gender oppression under this bourgeois system, and we will continue to die. We will continue to be killed. We will continue to be attacked. We will continue to be neutralized as long as we don't have those systems to reel us back into reality slowly but surely to be able to make a new world, because this is not working. This is not working for any of us. It should anger you. It should make you sad. It should embolden you, not make you fearful, because we outnumber our oppressors by millions and a few billion. Okay? So the fact of the matter is, we do have the power to overtake them. Not we can't, but we can. We can indeed can. We just need to have the programs. We need to make the programs necessary in order for us to get to a new world. If we want to live in peace once and for all, if we want to get to the earth back to where it was before Columbus, then we have to confront the class contradictions of capitalism, to confront the class contradictions when it comes to race, when it comes to gender, when it comes to sex, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to disability, when it comes to health, and other forms of oppression under this system. It's very, very necessary because, once again, if we don't have that class consciousness, if we don't develop it right, we will continue to be under the brunt of it. All of us, not just women, not just trans people, but all of us, because we're all under this system. Our ecology is under this system as well, being used as class warfare to justify the dominance of the bourgeois system. Gender plays a big role in it. The gender reveal parties, especially causing wildfires that indigenous people never even operated by. That was not even in their philosophies until Columbus came. So it's very important that the abolition and the complete destruction of capitalism also comes with the abolition of gender and what it entails in our modern social and political realities. As long as it continues to exist, then this is what we're up against.
Beautifully fucking said, Shanti. I love how you talk and how you just say everything so eloquently and so fucking on point, because you're fucking right. This system that has only existed for a couple hundred years is already destroying life on fucking Earth. And if we don't change ourselves, and if we don't begin changing the system by uprooting it and replacing it, if we don't begin changing it by creating our own revolutionary institutions, by creating our own
We
health
will
clinics, our own educational classes, our own revolutionary armies,
we will
we are
collapse
going to
on
die. We will
we will
die.
under it. We will
And I
collapse.
wanna, yep, we'll collapse. We will not make it. As a species, as a fucking species, not only can we do better, we need to do better. We need to live within the means that our land provides for us. We cannot exceed it. Capitalism requires infinite there's no such thing as enough for capitalism. Capitalism requires infinite growth on a finite planet with finite resources and a finite existence. And there's no such thing as enough for capitalism. It's more and more and more and more. It can't satisfy itself. It's a hunger that can never be quelled. And
Right.
I wanna read something that I wrote. Um, let me just pull it up. Sorry. Um, this isn't a white versus non-white fight, a queer versus cishet, a man versus woman, a neurotypical slash able body versus a neuroexpansive slash physically disabled person. This is a class struggle. All of these contradictions are linked and interconnected. The secondary contradictions of capitalism, racism, misogyny, ableism, queerphobia, fat phobia, and all other contradictions are rooted within a primary contradiction, the contradiction between the bourgeois and the proletariat. First came the idea of profit, then came the idea of racism, white supremacy, and the racial hierarchy. Racism is upheld because it justifies, quote unquote, the exploitation, oppression, and subjugation of colonized people, the siphoning of their resources, and pins colonized and colonizer against each other. Ableism is upheld because if you can't keep up with the production and labor compared to a neurotypical slash able-bodied person, you're discarded because it's easier to hire someone else and more profitable, and pins neurotypical and able-bodied people against neuroexpansive and physically disabled people. Sexism and the misogynistic patriarchal system is upheld to make women nothing more than baby making machines and pitting men against women, even if they have the same job and are being paid the exact same. Queerphobia is upheld to uphold the family unit, the quote unquote nuclear family, and to continue the maximization of of, um, of profit, and to pin cishet and queer people against one another. All of this ties to class struggle. Because if the bourgeois can make if the bourgeois can make a quote unquote white person feel superior than a quote unquote non-white person, they align with the bourgeois. If they can make a cishet person feel superior, quote unquote, to a queer person, they align more with the bourgeois and divide them. If they can make a man feel, quote unquote, superior to a woman, they align with the bourgeois. If they can make a neurotypical slash able bodied person feel, quote unquote, superior than a neuroexpansive slash. Sorry about that. My audio cut. Able-bodied person feel quote unquote superior than a neuroexpansive slash physically disabled person, they can align with the bourgeois. All of these oppressions are linked to the primary contradiction of capitalism. All of these contradictions must be combated through cultural revolution, mass line, survival programs, educating and elevating the masses through struggle alongside them, understanding their materialistic conditions and materialistic needs, meeting them where they're at materially and psychologically, applying a dialectical and scientific analysis on each community, implementing the principles of Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism and Pantherism to each community and their unique materialistic conditions. And once they see how these organizational structures are actually working, once the masses see that the vanguard party is giving a fuck about them and providing for them, once they see a struggle alongside them, they will come to respect the party and the revolutionary activities, uphold and take on and accept the ideological and political line of the party through observation and participation. Then they will begin to engage in praxis, organizing, class agitation, and having a principled and class analysis on their communities, on society, on class struggle, and the internal contradictions within society, the socioeconomic base and the superstructure, and they will become more militant, and we'll be able to move forward to a new strategic stage, change how we apply theory to our every changing conditions, and move forward and uphold a correct ideological and political line. That's what we have to fucking do.
Right on, comrade.
Hell yeah. Because it's true. Because the reason why colonizer people uphold white supremacy in the interest of the bourgeois, it's because they think that they share more in common with the bourgeois when they don't. They share more in common with colonized people than anyone else. But they don't think that because they have a racist white supremacist ideology, and therefore, because the bourgeois are white, then they must have more in common with them than colonized people. That's why.
Exactly. We've been warning colonizer people about this for years, that they will be targeted too.
Yep. No one is safe.
No one is safe. We told them that they will be targeted as well. And I mean, look now, like our warnings have come to life now.
Yep. Colonizer people are being killed by the police too. Now. Um and so and so and so on and so forth. It does not matter who you are. You are only as useful, and you're only considered useful and a quote unquote true member of society, unquote, as long as what your agency, the capital, is. You're only considered useful as how exploitable you are. And the moment you're no longer exploitable, the moment you are no longer able to uphold the interests of the bourgeois, the moment you cannot uphold white supremacy, they will discard you, throw you aside, and replace you as if you were nothing. They don't care about anyone. Their only interest is themselves and themselves alone. They will do anything and everything to kill anyone in their path to just gain a bit more profit. That's what they want. They don't care. They don't care about us. They don't care about the lower classes. They don't give a fuck. They have never cared. They do not give a single fuck about humanity or nature. They only care about their own interests, and they will sacrifice, murder, genocide, slaughter, and kill anyone in their path. And unless we step the fuck up and do something about it, no one is safe. We're all being killed right now, and and we and Shanti, as you remember, we said this before, in when we were reading the Wretched of the Earth, on the final chapter, um even the even colonizer people are having their culture erased by engaging in white supremacy, because the more they engage in white supremacy, the more they are erasing their actual heritage, their actual culture, to actual European cultures. But because they're engaging in quote unquote white culture and white supremacy, they are literally replacing that heritage with hatred and
Exactly.
malice and destroying their roots.
They're destroying their roots, and they want, and the Irish people here within these borders, Irish quote unquote Americans, are a prime example of this, because Irish people had their own language, their own heritage, their own history before they were, colonized and annexed by England. And because many Irish people are so assimilated here and see African people as the enemy, especially, they have erased their Irish heritage. They have erased their Irish roots. And they wonder why the Irish language is fading, because they are so brainwashed and so stripped away of their Celtic roots that they think that there's such thing as a white people, not understanding that it's a tortured condition. In this, under this system, you have to become white. No one is born quote unquote white. You have to become white. You have to become what the bourgeois tells you to be regarding what you look like. They don't care about your heritage. As long as you look a certain way and profitable enough to be given privileges, social, political, and economic privileges, then like they will continue. But even still, it's never enough. But that's the point. Because once again, it's all about power. It's all about dominance. They care about nobody. They care about nobody. They only care about the 3,500 people that have control over this planet. And we have the responsibility to stop them now, not 50 years, not 10 years, not 20 years. We cannot pray for a miracle anymore. Now we have to confront reality once and for all again and stop what they've been doing, especially for the past 55 years. We can stop them. We can stop them. There's no more excuses. Once again, there's no more excuses when it comes to this because they know the root causes. They know who's pulling the strings. They just don't want to confront it, either out of fear or because they've been so brainwashed that they continue to blame and attack the wrong people for why we're in this predicament now. It's not illegals. It's not the illegals. It's not the so-called Hispanics taking over. It's the bourgeois class, especially here in Chicago. They blame, the so-called illegals for kicking them out of their neighborhoods, not understanding that the bourgeois class was why Cabrini Green was destroyed. That the bourgeois class was the reason why Cookie Standifer was killed, why Dantrell Davis was killed, why Girl Ezra was raped on that staircase and left permanently disabled. The bourgeois class caused it, not Native people, not the so-called booty-scratching Africans. No, it's the bourgeois class, not our people, not our ancestral kin back home in our homelands. It's the bourgeois class sucking us dry, and y'all know it. Y'all seen it. Jane Byrne abandoned y'all after 30 days of living in the projects with those people. It was all for show. It was all for show. There were no good memories. You only talk about the good memories to hide from reality. That was the reality for a lot of us. The crack crisis, the AIDS crisis, all that stuff was made by the bourgeois class, not the illegals. Cabrini Green was destroyed by the bourgeois class, not the illegals. When did our problems become more apparent? When we started blaming the wrong people. We've been blaming the wrong people all this time, and we have more people under attack than ever before because we don't want to deal with the problem. Because it's always about the children's problems, always us. It's always the youth problem. It's always our problem. We're the problem. We're the issue. We're the reason why 531 years of oppression even exist. No, we're not. It's the bourgeois class doing all the work. It's the bourgeois class displacing all of us. They destroyed Wicker Park. They're destroying Humboldt Park. They destroyed Lincoln Park. They destroyed Inglewood. They destroyed Garfield Park. They destroyed Austin. Not the illegals. Not the booty-scratching Africans taking over. No, not our people. It's the bourgeois class and some of our own that engage in that system. Not these people that you think are taking over. They are leaving their homelands out of genocide. But we're never taught that. We're never taught the history of the Nahua people, of the Mexica people, of the Maya people, because they don't want us to know. They don't want us to know that there's more to us than just one group. No. It's a collective struggle. It's a collective struggle. And the more we continue to blame the wrong people and continue to go to the wrong people to save us, to give us quote unquote help, the more ammunition against all life that the bourgeois will have. And once again, we have the responsibility and the agency to take that over, to stop that once and for all. Because if we don't, then we're going to continue to collapse under it. And once again, the cycles will continue. It will continue itself. And there will be no point of stopping because, once again, we're continuing to blame the wrong people for why we're even here.
Yup. Sorry. Yup, literally. And that's what they want. That's what the bourgeois want. That they want us to blame these other colonized people. They want us to blame the masses instead of blaming gentrification, instead of blaming imperialism, instead of blaming things becoming more and more expensive because the bourgeois want to maximize profit. Instead of us engaging in a critical and class analysis of why things are the way they are and why the materialistic conditions under a capitalist society are going downwards, they want us to blame it on the quote unquote illegals. They want us to blame it on new African people. They want us to blame it on immigrants, despite
people,
the fact. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Despite the fact.
Trans people. They want to blame it on trans children.
The youth. They want to blame it on all these people, despite the fact that the quote-unquote illegals, the new Africans, the trans people, they're all facing the same shit as you are. They're all facing the exact same fucking shit that you're facing right now. Gentrification, things becoming more expensive, you losing your job because you got laid off, or you can't live in that expensive ass fucking one room apartment. They're all facing the exact same shit. We're all facing that shit.
We're all facing it. The illegals are not taking your $12.50 an hour job. Okay?
The bourgeois are.
They are. The bourgeois are. And once again, who gets the brunt of the violence? Who gets the brunt of the backlash? Us, the children, youth, all of us. We get the brunt of that because we're stuck into adult mess. Like ridiculousness that is killing us way more deeply than they think. They're so brainwashed that they cannot listen to anyone. They cannot read anything. They don't know how to read. They don't know how to write, but they do know how to follow what the bourgeois says to them because they want a problem. They want a problem. When you don't know how to read, right? When you don't know how to read correctly because the school system wants you to be a prostitute to capitalism, that's essentially what we have right here. They don't want you to think. You only think what the New York Times says. You only think what CNN says. You only think what the president says. You only think what the House of Reps says. You only say what the Senate says. You only think what the police say. That's it. Not your own people. Not who you actually are. Like, come on.
And I've said before, and I'll say again, and that's what they try to do. They try to make us assimilate to this bourgeois, white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist fucking ideology to fight amongst ourselves. Like, I'm sorry, Karen, you're not white, you're Spanish. You're not white, you're Portuguese. You're not white, you're German. You engaging in this fucking false identity is destroying actual culture. Look, the same shit that these fucking white supremacists are doing right now, co-opting and appropriating other culture, fucking turning actual traditions into hatred and malice. That's the same fucking shit the Nazis did to other cultures. They co-opted, appropriated, other cultures, and even German traditions, and turned it into hatred, turned it into malice. That's what they did.
That's what they did. And here's what a lot of people don't know. Aryan in the Nazi context is not the same thing as the actual Aryan people.
The Aryan people are literally an Indian group, an Indian tribe.
Exactly. They come from India. That is the actual Aryans. They are not so-called white. They are Indo-European. That is who they are. And second of all, about the swastikas, because a lot of people don't know about the swastikas. The swastikas come from Native Americans first. That's exactly where from. The swastika came from Native people of Abya Yala, from this continent. But because Hitler was so influenced by what the US was doing, once again, a global death cult, Hitler stole the swastika and made it a symbol of genocide. So much so that the native people that use the swastika for as a symbol of their own native pride have to relinquish their own symbol because a part Jewish person so assimilated and responsible for the killing of 6 million Jewish people in Germany. It was stolen from them. That's what a lot of people don't understand. That's why it's very important that we have these classes, that we do have these discussions. Because there's no such thing as an Aryan race. That's bullshit. It's just white supremacist bullshit that has killed 6 million people, continue to assimilate German people into this white identity that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It never ever existed. But that's the point. They want to assimilate as many people as they want so that the Irish language can fade, so that native languages can fade, so that we are so stripped from our heritage that we no longer know who we are. That's literally the whole point.
Literally, that's what it's all about. To uproot our identity, to uproot where people actually come from, and to replace it with this white supremacist colonizer, fucking settler colonial identity. That's what they want. To have us fight amongst each other. That's what this whole white supremacist bullshit is about. To uproot the roots of colonized people, to whitewash where they came from, their ancestry, their culture, their societies, their traditions, to put them in inhumane materialistic conditions, and to give them a whitewash history, to make them believe that things have always been this way, that they're inherently inferior and savages, and to have them engage in self-hatred, bourgeois thought, and to prevent them from engaging in a dialectical, historical, materialist analysis and a class analysis of why things are the way they are and how they got here. That's what they want. That's what they always want.
COINTELPRO is still here. McCarthyism is still here.
COINTELPRO is still here.
It never left. It never left.
It never fucking left.
This is exactly what we're doing. The migrant crisis. This is COINTELPRO all over again. Did y'all forget?
The KKK never went away. They're still here. They're still fucking alive.
Did y'all immediately forget that quickly? How disgusting, and how dare you forget about your own reality? Y'all are ignorant as well. You don't know that the reason why some African people are claiming to be fully indigenous to this continent is because the same oppressors that we both have convinced the both of us that we are both a completely different people than what we actually are. That's it.
Literally, and Kwame and Comrade Kwame mentioned this as well. How how African people who were colonized and came here, how they've been so colonized and so psychologically brainwashed that they want to believe that their people came from here instead of Africa because they have internalized hatred for being African, for the idea that for where they actually come from. And exactly. It's sad as fuck.
And that ethno-fascism. That ethno-fascism that plays. And you see it right here. They don't know who they are. They don't know their Ibo roots, their Yoruba roots, their Bakongo roots. They don't know their Baka roots. Because we do have some descent from the hunter-gatherer communities that are in Congo, Angola especially. There's actually an instrument kind of similar to a washboard that came from the Baka people of Congo, Angola. So that is like who we are. That is our heritage right there. Not this false identity that we want to adopt because we want to run away from our reality, or because we've been so brainwashed of who we actually are that, they're fading. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm proud to be African and I'm proud to be Choctaw. I'm proud to be Choctaw, but I never ever forget about my African identity, because at the end of the day, I'm still an African person. No matter how much native blood I have, no matter how much Irish blood I have, I can be proud of being Choctaw and Irish while extremely proclaiming my African identity. That is who I am. I cannot forget my bloodline. You cannot change your bloodline.
Exactly.
It never changes.
And that's the thing. And that's the thing. Some white supremacists say, "Oh, so you want me to hate myself for being white?" No. No one is saying for you to hate yourself for the color of your skin, or from where or who your family is. No one can control where they come from. No one can control what family they're born into. No one can control what skin color they're born with. But you want to know what you can control? You can control whether or not you continue to uphold this white supremacist system. That's where you can control. You can control whether or not you're going to continue in your ancestors' footsteps who upheld white supremacy and started colonialism, or whether or not you're going to actually fucking betray and engage in its destruction. That is what you can control. I've said before, and I'll say it again. I do not hate myself for my skin color. I do not hate myself because I'm quote unquote white. What I hate is that I am treated as if I am superior above others because I am sorry, wait. Let me wait. I'm trying to formulate words. I do not hate myself for the skin color that I have, or that I'm quote unquote white. I hate that I am treated as if I am superior because I have a different skin color. That's what I hate. That's disgusting. Because that's bullshit. That's fucking bullshit.
It is. It really, really, truly is. And that is something that we have to completely tackle. We cannot leave that aspect out, because if we do, then it's going to be oppression within each other all over again, and we're not confronting anything. We have to confront all areas of our oppression, self-hatred, and all of that stuff. The work begins with ourselves. We're not prepared, to go up against our oppressors yet. This is the education stage that is absolutely necessary. This is when you talked about Che Guevara and the folklorism. Revolution without education is just
doomed.
Violence for the sake of it.
Yep, exactly.
That's part of the reason why Fred Hampton was killed, because he hated the Weather Underground. He hated what they were doing. They were being chauvinistic. They were being adventurous. They were doing violence for the sake of violence, getting people hurt, getting unprepared proletariat people hurt, and getting them thrown to the wolves, the pigs. So, you cannot have revolution without the education phase. That's where the work ends. That is where the work starts.
Political education is always where it begins first. You know what? I keep on saying this quote from from I keep on saying this quote from Huey P. Newton, but it's so true. It's so fucking true. Let me get it right now. Oh, here it is. To quote Huey P. Newton himself, likewise, military victory does not necessarily lead to political victory. In people's war, the people are the instruments of victory, which is the transfer of power to the people. Essential to this is winning the people to embrace a correct ideological and political line. If the masses attain effective political power but lack a correct ideological and political line, defeat will follow. If the masses are won to a correct ideological and political line, and it is organizationally consolidated, but they cannot yet seize political power, eventual victory is secured and awaits the ripening of a revolutionary situation. In other words, ideological and political line determines everything. You can have power. You can have militancy. If that militancy is not led by a correct ideological and political line, if it's not being led by a class analysis and a principle analysis, your movement will fail. It will collapse. It will break from within. It will not go anywhere. Praxis without theory is unorganized anger. It is violence for the sake of violence. Exactly as you were saying, it's adventurous, it's commandous, and it's theory without praxis is willful in action.
Is willful in action, and that is, that's the thing. Like, I know the world is just a complete hellspin right now. We know everything is going bad. You know, COVID and all that stuff. We know you're angry. We know you're enraged, but you have to have the educational phase of how and the why of these realities. Cannot go attack, the pigs for the sake of it, because it's only going to be an explosion of emotions. Like, that's why you have to really keep it together until we can actually get there collectively, because it's only going to be an explosion of emotions that places us at risk, more risk than you think. Like, once again, I know you're angry, and I know you're enraged, and I know because we're all in this. Okay, we're all in it, but we have to keep it together for the kids, for the youth, because we have a important aspect that we have to educate politically. You cannot just skip all the steps and just go attack. No, we have to keep it together, because until we are actually ready, we can't really do anything, because once again, we don't have those systems in place, and we don't have that education phase. Without the education phase, you're screwed.
Beautifully said. And what you're saying about the hatred, I said this before, and I will say it again. A revolutionary is guided by two emotions, right? Love for his fellow human being, his fellow revolutionary, and hatred for the oppressor class and those who make life a living hell. And while that hatred is valid, while that hatred is absolutely justified, it should never it should never go above the love you have for your fellow human being. It should never go above the love and hope that you have for humanity. It should never go. Your hatred should never be the guiding force of your action, but love and care and self-improvement. That is what you should be guided by. That hatred is valid. That hatred is 100% justified. I hate these white supremacist fucks. I hate these bourgeois shitheads that are making life a living hell for everyone involved, including my people, my nation, Cuba. I fucking hate it. But I will not let that guide. I will not let that hatred be the primary thing that guides my actions. Get that at the end of the day, it is through love and respect and meeting the people where they're at and calling to their humanity that makes empires fall. Not hatred, but respect and admiration. That's what the imperialists hate the most. It sounds corny. It sounds corny, but it's true. They thrive off of us hating one another. They thrive off of that hatred. They live off of it. But the moment we start loving one another, that's what they hate. Because the moment we start loving one another, then we start realizing, hey, you're not my enemy. They are. And that's what they fear the most. They fear that realization. They fear that realization above all else. The thing that the bourgeois fear, the thing that all oppressor classes have feared from now to human history as a whole, they have always feared the oppressed. Stop fighting themselves and start actually acknowledging who their actual enemy is. That's what they fear the most.
Right. You cannot guide your revolutionary plight through hatred, through anger, through
It'll never work.
It'll never work. It has to be grounded. It needs to be grounded because you cannot base revolution off emotions.
Mm-hmm. It has to be principled. It has to be critical.
It has to be critical because without that aspect, then you're going to put your community in a more further violent predicament with the bourgeois system than what we actually are right now. We already have enough going on. We don't need more fuel to the fire. Okay? Really, really, really keep it in. Really keep it in. Because once again, we have children to educate. We have the babies to educate. We have the youth to educate. We have other people to meet where they're at. We can't ignore that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ignore that, right? You can't. So you have to really keep it together. Really keep it together. Do I hate the state that the world is in right now? Absolutely. I absolutely hate every single minute of it. I hate the U.S. empire. I hate the revisionist states that are sucking us dry. I hate imperialism. I hate colonialism. I hate all of it. We all do. Well, most of us, but we do. We do. We do. But we have to keep it together and become principled to understand how we're going to get out of this mess, how we're going to get out of this system, how we're going to destroy this system. Mm-hmm. I hate it. But I have to become principled. I have to understand. I have to think about the children. I have to think about the youth because that's the most important people that we have to think about. What about them? We have to educate them, right? So I cannot just go and, kill every single pig that I see. In order for me to get there, I have to make the children become principled. I have to educate them. I have to help them proclaim who they truly are. I have to make them understand and be aware of their destiny first. Then we can go to, okay, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we defend ourselves? How do we fight?
Exactly. And to quote, let me try. Oop, I think I accidentally. Oh man, I had the quote right in front of me, but I lost it. Give me 1 second. But no, yeah, exactly as you're saying. That hatred is valid, but we cannot let it consume us. We have to become principled. We have to become dialectical. We have to engage in a class analysis in a Marxist and principle analysis of all these contradictions and why they are the way they are and why the materialistic conditions are the way they are if we're going to create a new society. Before we elevate the people, we have to elevate ourselves, educate ourselves, engage in self-criticism and criticism, and then we'll be able to elevate the masses. Then we'll be able to elevate them and make until they're as knowledgeable or even more knowledgeable than us. That's the point. That's why we're doing this for the next generation and the generation after that, for all of humanity, for time immemorial. That's the whole point. And I found the quote, and to quote Che himself, the true revolutionary is guided by a great feeling of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary lacking this quality. It's impossible. If you don't love the people, if you're not doing this because you love your fellow man and you love your fellow revolutionary, if you're not doing this because you don't want to see humanity flourish and succeed, then you're not revolutionary. Simple as that.
Exactly. That's why we said we have to keep it together. You have to keep it together.
Principled.
Because it's not easy. It's not easy to try to, educate people, under, like the brunt of bourgeois violence. I get it. Once again, I get it. But you have your people that you have to free. You have people begging to not live under this doom, under this misery of the bourgeois system of capitalism, of colonialism, of imperialism. You have those people to think about. Think about those people. Think about how much leeway you're going to make if you make them principled, if you stay principled and not react out of anger, but out of revolutionary love, political love for your people. You have to keep it together. Once again,
Yep.
it's a fucking clusterfuck right now, and it will continue to get worse. But we can make a lot of leeway if we start becoming principled and politically educated now, because we cannot operate off doom. We cannot operate off escaping reality. Sometimes you have to feel that defeat in order to re-strategize. To understand, okay, this happened. What can we do now? What can we do to start back small and then work ourselves back up again? That's what you have to think about. That's what you have to think about. And this is me as a 19-year-old saying this. I'm still in the process of decolonizing. It's been 3 years now. Like, I'm still decolonizing my history. I'm still decolonizing my identity and who I am. What sentiments I may have picked up. That's what you have to think about. It has to be grounded. It has to be principled. Think about Mao. Think about Sankara. Think about Nkrumah. Think about their people. You know what I'm saying? Think about their people. Think about that. Really, really do think about it. Because if you don't, then once again, you're going to put us in a predicament that we do not want to be in right now or ever. Cop City, COVID, all that stuff. We don't want anymore. We don't want more fuel to the fire. You have to keep it together and think about the people, not yourself. It's not just yourself. We all hate it. But it's that love for the people that can make a lot of leeway as long as you know how to make them principled, make them aware, make them understand that we can make a new world. We don't have to collapse under the doom that the bourgeois wants us to be in. We can do this. We can do this. That's why I say again, keep it together. Focus on your people. Don't focus on the voting ballots. Don't focus on the White House. Don't focus on these revisionist fucks trying to kill every single one of us in our planet. Focus on the people and the land. Focus on where they're at. Focus on where the land is at. Focus on where ecology is at. Think about the animals. Think about where they're at. Our nature, our creatures, the planet's creatures, our livelihood, their livelihood. Think about that instead of collapsing under the anger and the resentment against the bourgeois system because it's valid. But now you have to really reel it in and make it more grounded. How do we get out of this system? How? Love to the people and educating them at where they're at. That's the most important thing, especially the most oppressed people in our community, especially the children and the youth, us, because we are the most oppressed class. We have to meet our fellow young people coming up at where they're at as well, because they're now into, the guillotine, by the fascist US government. You know what I'm saying? We have to meet them where they're at so that they are aware of what to do and not being co-opted again to, think of their reality as a voting issue. No. We have to reel it back in. We have to reel it in and educate them at where they're at. It's that love for the people once again. And that's what we need to really focus on instead of collapsing under our anger, because it's not going to help anything. Complaining is not going to stop, capitalist-driven climate change. You have to understand how we got here and how you can end it, how your people can end it, how we can all end it. Because it's not we can't, but it's we can. It just has to be grounded.
Principled.
Like
that's what it's gotta be.
Like just reel it in. Just keep it together for a little while longer. Just keep it in for a little while longer. And do something with that anger. Make it love. Make it revolutionary. Turn that anger into revolutionary passion, into revolutionary love, into revolutionary admiration for yourself, for your people, for the land. Once again, that's the most important thing that we should focus on.
Right on. Beautifully said. Turn that hatred, turn that resentment into love and passion for the people. You gotta meet them where they're at. And to quote Fred Hampton himself, we gotta face some facts. That the masses are poor, that the masses belong to what we call the lower class. And when I talk about the masses, I'm talking about the white masses. I'm talking about the black masses. I'm talking about the brown masses. And the yellow masses too. We've got to face the fact that some people say you fight fire best with fire, but we say you put fire out best with water. We say you don't fight racism with racism. We're gonna fight racism with solidarity. We say you don't fight capitalism with no black capitalism. You fight capitalism with socialism. That's what you do. You fight it with revolutionary love. You fight it with solidarity. You fight it with a principled dialectical and scientific analysis and implement that theory, that analysis through practice, through struggle alongside the community. That's what you do. That's what we gotta do.
That's right. That's right. That's why these classes exist. It's a starting point.
Political education is everything. First comes political education, then comes militancy.
Then comes that militancy, that training aspect. Education first, then training. Then you confront the reality, full throttle. But education comes first. And until we can be able to achieve a communist socialist world, this is what we have to do first.
Yup. Literally. This chapter is fucking amazing. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, because once again, it's talking about how gender plays a role in our oppression, how the concept of gender plays a role in our oppression, especially in the Puerto Rican world, in the so-called Latin American world, the Native world. How capitalism plays a role in gender festering into forms of oppression and bounds within our own. You know what I'm saying? Because even men are not protected. Because once again, hypermasculinity is a capitalist-driven trauma response to them being gendered, having to uphold, the roles of, the so-called man. You know what I'm saying? And because, our ancestors were gender fluid. We didn't have, a binary gender system. We lived with the people in the land where nature is not fixed. Biology is not fixed. So
it's fluid.
It's to have that aspect be taught as well, to be taught to teach ourselves the gender fluid version of our history. That is important.
Yep. Literally, everything that they just said on point. On point. If only more people understood this. If only more people understood this. But that's what we gotta do.
Educate them where they're at. Once again, don't come at them with all those fancy words, all those fancy vilified words, anarchism, socialism, communism, all that stuff. Talk to them in terms first.
Exactly.
Then
exactly.
Then you can introduce them to these concepts. That's it.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. In order to radicalize the masses, you have to meet them where they're at materially and psychologically. That's what you have to do. Before you throw these terms at them, because remember, a lot of people, due to bourgeois thought, anti-communist propaganda, and white supremacy, a lot of people think that socialism is bad. So the moment you say socialism, the moment you say communism, the moment you say Mao, Stalin, you're going to scare them off. So what do? You plant revolutionary seeds in their minds through engaging with them, talking to them, meeting them where they're at, and then as they get to know you better, and as you show them how a better society can be made, they'll start agreeing with you on socialism without even realizing it. That's the whole point of observation and participation. That's the whole point. Getting the masses to radicalize, to revolutionary agitate them, and to engage and to engage in dialectical materialism by showing them first, by showing them how it's done, observation, participation. And once they see that these things are working, then they will come to respect the party. That's the whole point. First, you got to earn the respect of the masses. And you're not gonna get that through glorified book clubs. You're not gonna get that through shouting at them and telling them terms that they don't even fucking understand. No, you educate them, you elevate them, you radicalize them, you agitate them by meeting them where they're at materialistically and psychologically, meeting them where they're at, providing for their materialistic conditions and needs. And then once they see that you give a fuck about them, once they see that you're helping them and struggling alongside them, then they'll hear you out. Then they'll start thinking, hey, maybe the socialism thing isn't so bad after all. That's what you do.
Yep.
This book club was awesome. Also, I see we're 4 hours in, so we've been asked for a really long time, and this discussion was absolutely fucking beautiful and amazing. Do you have anything else to say, Comrade Shanti?
No. All I can really say is, in order for us to in order to defeat our enemies, we attack all areas of oppression and all that stuff, so that we know what we're doing. And once again, meeting people where they're at, turning that anger into revolutionary love, and turning the revolutionary love into principle, and go from there.
Right on. Beautifully said. And with that, all power to the people. All power to the people. All revolutionary love and power. And I hope everyone has a beautiful day. Oh, by the way, Shanti, I'm not going to close the room. I'm just going to end the recording. Okay.
Okay, bet.